There was a time when the world still felt small enough to fit in your pocket, before endless notifications, before every photo lived in the cloud. The 2000s were a decade of transition, half analog, half digital. We still burned our own CDs, still called friends from the kitchen phone, still waited for the internet to dial up. It was the last era that truly felt real, where Friday nights smelled like pizza rolls, sounded like Linkin Park or Usher on a scratched disc, and looked like the glow of a bulky CRT monitor lighting up your face in the dark. We didn't know it then, but we were living through a bridge from the world we grew up in to the one that now fits in our palms. I remember the way mornings felt back then, before the world started living on screens, before alarms came from touchscreens glowing in the dark. My day began with the faint buzz of a flip phone vibrating on the nightstand, the kind of sound that felt almost alive. It wasn't smart, not yet. It didn't scroll endlessly or talk back. It was just there, folded shut, reliable, holding your messages like tiny secrets. You'd flip it open, squint at the pixelated screen, maybe check if someone had texted overnight. Most of the time it was empty, and that was fine. Life didn't depend on what you missed. You just got up. There was a chill in the air as you padded across the carpet, a hoodie thrown over your t-shirt, maybe the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The computer in the corner, a bulky tower with a humming fan, waited like a sleeping pet. You'd press the power button and hear it whir to life, the monitor flashing from black to blue as the Windows XP logo floated across. The speakers clicked, then released that soft startup melody that somehow still lives in the back of everyone's mind. Sometimes you'd open AIM or MSN Messenger before breakfast, just to see who was online. The chat windows would bloom one by one, names with quirky fonts and song lyrics in their status messages. You didn't know it then, but that was social media in its purest form, quiet, personal, and exciting in a way that felt safe. Every home had that one shared computer, usually placed in the living room or a spare corner of the house, never too far from watchful parents. You'd sit in that squeaky office chair, mouse clicking, connection dialing. That screeching, robotic dial-up tone filled the room, like a creature trying to find its way through static, until finally the page loaded, pixel by pixel. There was no rush. Waiting was just part of it. You'd scroll through MySpace pages with backgrounds of glittering stars and autoplay songs that froze the browser. Each one felt like a portal into someone's personality. Messy, colorful, unapologetically human. After school, there were afternoons spent burning CDs. You'd open a stack of blank discs, slide one into the tray, and carefully choose each song. A little bit of Linkin Park, some Usher, maybe a forgotten track you found on LimeWire after hours of downloading. Sometimes the file wasn't even the song it claimed to be, but you didn't mind. The fun was in the search, the waiting, the sense of ownership when your playlist was finally complete. You'd take a black Sharpie and write Summer Mix 2005 or Road Trip across the shiny surface. That small act, labeling your soundtrack, felt more personal than anything we do with playlists today. Evenings were simple. Dinner at the table, the smell of something baking, the news murmuring from the TV. Then, once the plates were cleared, you'd grab your portable CD player or your iPod Mini, if you were lucky. You'd plug in those white earbuds and disappear for a while. Maybe you'd head outside, watching the sun sink behind rows of identical houses, feeling like the world was small but perfectly yours. Weekends were for wandering. Sometimes that meant a mall trip with friends, pocketing a few quarters for the payphone in case your mom wanted to know when to pick you up. You'd drift from store to store, maybe stop at Sam Goody or FYE, flipping through CDs, even though you knew you'd probably burn the same songs later at home. The smell of pretzels, the echo of laughter bouncing off tiled floors, it all felt electric, even if nothing big happened. There was freedom in those little rituals. Driving with a friend in a hand-me-down car, the glove box rattling with burned CDs and gum wrappers. You'd argue over what to play, compromise on a track that everyone could sing to, and just drive. Nowhere in particular, just away. The road stretched endlessly under golden streetlights, and for a moment it felt like the future was waiting somewhere just beyond the next song. Nights ended the same way they began, quietly. Maybe you'd scroll through a few texts before bed, the keypad clicking softly under your thumb. No blue bubbles, no read receipts, no pressure. Just a few words, a good night, and that familiar snap of the phone closing. The room would fall dark again, the only sound a faint hum from the computer still cooling down. You drift to sleep with that soft feeling of connection, not to the internet, not to a feed, but to the world around you. It was slower then, but in every sense, it felt more alive. There was something special about that shared family computer. It was more than just a piece of technology. It was a gathering point, a little glowing window that the whole household revolved around. Everyone had their turn. Your dad would use it to check the weather or his email on Yahoo. Your mom might look up a recipe or print directions from MapQuest. And you were waiting for your time, watching the clock, hoping no one needed the phone line while you were online. The sound of that dial-up still echoes somewhere, that high-pitched handshake between worlds. A gateway to something that felt infinite but innocent at the same time. The computer sat on a heavy wooden desk, usually surrounded by old papers, half-empty soda cans, and maybe a small pile of burned CDs. The keyboard keys had a soft shine from use, and the mouse cable tangled around everything. The screen was thick and curved, the kind that warmed up the air around it after being on too long. When you leaned close, you could hear a faint hum, like static mixed with a heartbeat. The wallpaper was usually the Windows XP hills, that green slope and blue sky that somehow felt hopeful, like a postcard from the future. The internet back then was quiet. There weren't endless feeds or short clips demanding your attention. Instead, there were message boards, fan sites, and homepages that looked like digital scrapbooks. People built things online, not for likes or follows, but because it felt exciting to have a corner of the web that was theirs. You'd click on a MySpace profile, and it would take forever to load a glittering background, animated stars, maybe a photo collage of friends in sepia tones. Then the music would start, sometimes too loud, a song chosen to define that person's mood. That first chord of your favorite song playing from someone else's page made you feel like you already knew them. And then there were the chats, MSN Messenger, I'm Yahoo Chat, glowing icons in the corner of the screen that meant someone you cared about was online. You'd open the chat window and see their status. Away, busy, or something cryptic like "don't want to talk, but maybe do." There was an art to those conversations, the subtle timing of when to reply, when to wait, when to send that little smiley face. It was communication built on pauses and imagination. You didn't have typing indicators or instant read receipts. Every message carried a bit of mystery. If you were lucky, you had a webcam, a grainy little device that sat on top of the monitor, making you look like a shadow behind static. Video calls were rare and special. You could spend an entire evening just sitting there, smiling at the flickering face of a friend on the other side of town. Sometimes it would freeze mid-laugh, and you'd both just stare, waiting for it to catch up. Somehow that made it even more real. In between those moments, there was music. The early 2000s were full of it. Winamp visualizers pulsed to the beat of downloaded tracks, swirling neon lines that moved like liquid fire. You'd sit there in the dim light of your room, the glow of the monitor reflecting off posters on the wall. Maybe a band, maybe a movie. You'd burn mix CDs late into the night, watching that slow progress bar crawl forward as your playlist became something tangible. When the tray popped open, it felt like victory. That disc, handwritten and smudged with fingerprints, was your identity, a piece of yourself you could carry anywhere. Weekends had their own rhythm. Saturday mornings were for cartoons and cereal, but by the afternoon, you were online again. Maybe searching for new wallpapers, maybe messaging friends to plan a hangout. And if the weather was good, you'd grab a backpack, toss in a CD player, and meet up at the park. Sometimes you'd take pictures with disposable cameras, goofy, off-center shots that you wouldn't see for weeks until the film came back from Walgreens. When you finally held the glossy prints in your hands, it felt like time travel, a little piece of your own story captured forever. Evenings felt slower. You'd hear the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the muffled laugh track from the living room TV. Then the lights would dim, and the screen would be the only thing left glowing in the dark. The hum of the computer fan mixed with the clicking of keys. That was the soundtrack of the 2000s. Maybe a friend messaged you good night. Maybe you closed every window, shut it down, and listened to the silence afterward. There was a kind of peace in that, a quiet pause that the modern world seems to have forgotten. That was daily life then, a mix of noise and stillness, technology and touch. Every message, every burned CD, every late-night login meant something. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was the rhythm of a time when connection was slower, smaller, and somehow more meaningful. There was something special about that shared family computer. It was more than just a piece of technology. It was a gathering point, a little glowing window that the whole household revolved around. Everyone had their turn. Your dad would use it to check the weather or his email on Yahoo. Your mom might look up a recipe or print directions from MapQuest. And you were waiting for your time, watching the clock, hoping no one needed the phone line while you were online. The sound of that dial-up still echoes somewhere, that high-pitched handshake between worlds, a gateway to something that felt infinite but innocent at the same time. The computer sat on a heavy wooden desk, usually surrounded by old papers, half-empty soda cans, and maybe a small pile of burned CDs. The keyboard keys had a soft shine from use, and the mouse cable tangled around everything. The screen was thick and curved, the kind that warmed up the air around it after being on too long. When you leaned close, you could hear a faint hum like static mixed with a heartbeat. The wallpaper was usually the Windows XP hills, that green slope and blue sky that somehow felt hopeful, like a postcard from the future. The internet back then was quiet. There weren't endless feeds or short clips demanding your attention. Instead, there were message boards, fan sites, and homepages that looked like digital scrapbooks. People built things online, not for likes or follows, but because it felt exciting to have a corner of the web that was theirs. You'd click on a MySpace profile, and it would take forever to load a glittering background. Animated stars, maybe a photo collage of friends in sepia tones. Then the music would start, sometimes too loud, a song chosen to define that person's mood. That first chord of your favorite song playing from someone else's page made you feel like you already knew them. And then there were the chats, MSN Messenger, Yahoo Chat, glowing icons in the corner of the screen that meant someone you cared about was online. You'd open the chat window and see their status, away, busy, or something cryptic like don't want to talk but maybe do. There was an art to those conversations, the subtle timing of when to reply, when to wait, when to send that little smiley face. It was communication built on pauses and imagination. You didn't have typing indicators or instant read receipts. Every message carried a bit of mystery. If you were lucky, you had a webcam, a grainy little device that sat on top of the monitor, making you look like a shadow behind static. Video calls were rare and special. You could spend an entire evening just sitting there, smiling at the flickering face of a friend on the other side of town. Sometimes it would freeze mid-laugh, and you'd both just stare, waiting for it to catch up. Somehow that made it even more real. In between those moments, there was music. The early 2000s were full of it. Winamp visualizers pulsed to the beat of downloaded tracks, swirling neon lines that moved like liquid fire. You'd sit there in the dim light of your room, the glow of the monitor reflecting off posters on the wall. Maybe a band, maybe a movie. You'd burn mixed CDs late into the night, watching that slow progress bar crawl forward as your playlist became something tangible. When the tray popped open, it felt like victory. That disc, handwritten and smudged with fingerprints, was your identity, a piece of yourself you could carry anywhere. Weekends had their own rhythm. Saturday mornings were for cartoons and cereal, but by the afternoon, you were online again. Maybe searching for new wallpapers, maybe messaging friends to plan a hangout. And if the weather was good, you'd grab a backpack, toss in a CD player, and meet up at the park. Sometimes you'd take pictures with disposable cameras, goofy, off-center shots that you wouldn't see for weeks until the film came back from Walgreens. When you finally held the glossy prints in your hands, it felt like time travel, a little piece of your own story captured forever. Evenings felt slower. You'd hear the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the muffled laugh track from the living room TV. Then the lights would dim, and the screen would be the only thing left glowing in the dark. The hum of the computer fan mixed with the clicking of keys, that was the soundtrack of the 2000s. Maybe a friend messaged you goodnight. Maybe you closed every window, shut it down, and listened to the silence afterward. There was a kind of peace in that, a quiet pause that the modern world seems to have forgotten. That was daily life then, a mix of noise and stillness, technology and touch. Every message, every burned CD, every late-night login meant something. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was the rhythm of a time when connection was slower, smaller, and somehow more meaningful. Call on next segment, no less 600 words. Just clear text for VO ChatGPT. The road was freedom back then, not the kind you scrolled through, but the kind you could feel in your chest. There was something about sliding into the driver's seat of an old car, the fabric worn smooth from years of use, the faint smell of gasoline mixed with air freshener shaped like a pine tree. The keys jingled, the engine coughed to life, and suddenly the world felt open. You didn't need a destination. Sometimes the point was just to drive dot in the glove box. There was always a pile of burned CDs, plastic sleeves with handwritten labels in black Sharpie. Summer mix, heartbreak tracks, driving home late. Each one told a story, a playlist that captured who you were for a moment in time. You'd shuffle through them, the cases slightly cracked, fingerprints smudging the silver side. It didn't matter if they skipped or if one track was accidentally replaced with static. They were yours. You'd slide the disc into the slot, hear the mechanical click, and the opening notes of your favorite song filled the air like a spark. The speakers weren't perfect. Sometimes the bass rattled, sometimes the right side barely worked, but it didn't matter. You'd roll the windows down, arm hanging out, wind whipping through your hair. The world outside was moving, trees blurring, sun flashing between buildings, but inside it was just you and the music. A burned CD wasn't just a playlist. It was a memory in motion. Every friend group had someone who was the DJ, the one who knew how to download songs from LimeWire without crashing the computer, who made the perfect mixes for every mood. There was an art to it. You had to choose the right order. Something upbeat to start the drive, something moody for when the sun dipped low. Sometimes the songs would overlap with life in a way that felt planned. A lyric hitting just as a stoplight turned green, or a chorus blasting as you crested a hill. It made everything cinematic, like your own personal movie. Road trips were a rite of passage. You'd throw a few snacks in the back seat, grab your burned CD case, and head out with no real plan. Maybe to a lake, maybe just to the next town over. Anywhere that felt like somewhere else. The seats would grow warm from the sun, the AC barely working, and everyone would take turns controlling the music. Someone always fell asleep. Someone always took photos with a disposable camera. And someone always said, "Don't change it. This song's perfect." The car became a moving time capsule. A small world on wheels filled with laughter, inside jokes, and songs that would never sound the same again. That gas was cheap enough that driving didn't feel like a luxury. A few dollars could buy you an entire night of escape. The glowing numbers on the gas pump, the smell of asphalt and coffee from the station, it was part of the ritual. You'd buy a bag of chips, maybe a soda, and head back on the road under the orange haze of streetlights. The headlights stretched ahead into the unknown, and for a few hours you were infinite. Sometimes the drive ended in silence. You'd park by the beach, the lake, or an empty parking lot, and just sit there, letting the music fade while the world around you breathed. No one was checking their phones, no one was posting. You just talked or didn't. The quiet was enough. The dashboard light cast a soft glow across your hands, and the car smelled faintly of old air freshener and summer air. You could feel life slowing down, and it was beautiful. There was something honest about those nights, when the only light came from passing cars, and the only sound was the hum of the engine cooling down. You'd sit on the hood, look at the stars, and talk about the future like it was a faraway country you couldn't wait to visit. Everyone had big dreams then, but no one was in a hurry. The world still felt full of promise, like there was room for everything to happen. When it was finally time to go home, the ride back always felt quieter. The roads were emptier, the songs softer, and the wind colder. You'd pull into the driveway, headlights cutting through the dark for a moment before fading away. The CD would keep spinning, even as you turned off the ignition, the last notes fading into silence. You'd sit there for a second, not ready to leave that feeling behind, that fleeting mix of youth, freedom, and the sound of a burned CD echoing in the dark. That's what the 2000s felt like, not digital, not fast, not perfect, just real. A decade where the world was small enough to touch, and the road was wide enough for everything you hadn't figured out yet. There was something timeless about the way we captured moments back then. We didn't have phones that could take 100 photos in a second. Every shot mattered. You carried a disposable camera in your bag or glove box, maybe a Polaroid if you were lucky. Those plastic bodies with their little clicks and flashes were our windows to memory. You'd wind the film manually after every shot, that little ratcheting sound echoing satisfaction. You didn't know if the photo would turn out. Someone might have blinked, or the flash might have been too bright, but that was part of it. You lived the moment first, and then you captured it. There was a particular kind of anticipation in waiting for film to develop. You'd drop off the roll at Walgreens or a small photo lab, the clerk handing you a slip of paper and saying, "Come back in a few days." Those few days felt like forever. You'd think about the pictures, the road trip, the concert, the party, and wonder how they'd turned out. Then, finally, you'd get that small envelope with glossy prints inside. The smell of photo paper and chemicals hit first. You'd flip through them right there at the counter, laughing when someone made a face or when the flash turned a dark room into a white blur. The imperfections were perfect. They made the memories real. When digital cameras arrived, it felt like magic. Suddenly you could see the photo instantly, delete it, retake it, crop it, zoom in. You'd hold that silver rectangle in your hands, maybe a Canon PowerShot or a Porta Kodak EasyShare, and feel like a professional. The lens would slide open with a little mechanical buzz, and the screen would glow blue in the dark. At parties, people took turns posing, arms linked, cheeks pressed together. You'd snap dozens of photos, the flash bouncing off red Solo cups and shiny kitchen counters. Later, you'd upload them to your computer with that thick USB cable. Each file named something like DSC00327. Those photos ended up everywhere, on MySpace profiles, in email attachments, or printed at the local store and pinned to corkboards. Sometimes you'd create collages with scissors and glue, layering glossy prints with stickers and doodles. There was pride in having physical photos, something you could hold, trade, taped to your wall. Your bedroom walls said everything about who you were. Movie posters, magazine cutouts, and photo strips from the mall photo booth lined the space like a personal museum. The photo booth, that was another ritual. You'd cram 3 or 4 people inside, the curtain barely closing, and drop in a few crumpled dollars. The countdown would start, and you'd scramble to strike a pose before the flash went off. Serious face, funny face, tongue out, surprise. The picture slid out warm, still damp with ink. You'd tear the strip down the middle, give half to your best friend, and stick your own half in a wallet or locker. Every wrinkle and faded edge told a story. There was a kind of trust in the way we documented life. We didn't take hundreds of photos to find the perfect one. We just took one and let it be what it was. There were red eyes, blurry smiles, crooked angles, but it was real. The grain, the flash, the uneven light, all of it felt alive. Every picture held a heartbeat. When social media started to grow, those digital memories took on new life. You'd upload a photo to your MySpace or PhotoBucket account, waiting for it to load over slow internet. The captions were simple. Best night ever. Road trip vibes. Summer 2006. Comments would trickle in, sometimes hours later. Missed this. Or you look so good. That was connection in its purest form. You weren't chasing approval, you were just sharing life. At sleepovers, cameras passed from hand to hand. The room would be full of laughter, music playing softly in the background. Someone would take a picture at the exact moment everyone burst into laughter, and that flash would freeze time. You'd wake up the next morning with messy hair, half a bag of chips on the floor, and that same camera still sitting on the knit stand, holding the proof of a night that already felt nostalgic. Those images were more than pictures. They were anchors. When you look at them now, you can almost smell the vanilla-scented candles, hear the faint hum of a computer left on overnight, feel the warmth of the flash on your skin. The faces are younger, the clothes outdated, but the feeling remains. You didn't need filters or edits. You just needed to be there. We didn't know we were living in a golden age of imperfection, when memories were real, tangible, and fragile. A roll of film, a disposable camera, a scratched CD, a wall of photos curling at the edges. Each one held a fragment of the decade, a snapshot of a simpler rhythm, when moments weren't curated. They were kept. Friday nights in the 2000s had their own kind of electricity, a quiet excitement that built up as the sun started to set and the week finally let go of its grip. You could feel it everywhere, in the hum of televisions, in the sound of laughter echoing through neighborhoods, in the glow of neon signs flickering to life over parking lots. No one needed a plan. You just knew that something was happening, and somehow you'd end up where everyone else was. The mall was the heartbeat of those nights. Every teenager, every friend group, every couple found their way there, sooner or later. You'd walk through the glass doors and be hit by the blast of air conditioning, the smell of pretzels from Auntie Anne's, and the distant beat of whatever pop song was playing over the store speakers. You'd drift from store to store. Hot Topic, with its black walls and banned tees. Hollister with its dim lights and ocean spray scent that clung to your clothes. Spencer's with its forbidden shelves of jokes and gadgets. Each store felt like a different world, and exploring them all was a kind of ritual. You didn't buy much. Most of the time it was just about being there, walking, talking, laughing, pretending you were older than you were. Someone always had a flip phone, snapping low-resolution pictures under the fluorescent lights. The small screen would flash, and you'd all crowd around to see how it turned out. The pictures were always grainy, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that you were there. Together. The food court was the social hub, trays clattering, soda fountains hissing, the smell of fried food mixing with the sweet scent of Cinnabon. You'd claim a table, surrounded by friends, and stay for hours. French fries were passed around, secrets were whispered, and plans were made. There was always that one person who showed up late, waving from across the crowd, and somehow you could hear your name even through all the noise. Parents walked by carrying shopping bags, couples shared milkshakes, and kids leaned over railings to drop pennies into the fountain below, making wishes they'd never admit out loud. Sometimes, after the mall, the night kept going. Maybe you'd stop by the arcade, lights flashing, tokens clinking, the sound of button mashing and laughter mixing into chaos. Maybe you'd go to a diner, one of those places that never seemed to close, where the booths were cracked vinyl and the jukebox still worked. You'd order fries or milkshakes just to have an excuse to stay. The waitress would roll her eyes when you asked for extra napkins, but she'd smile anyway. Outside, cars passed by with music blaring, bits of Hey Ya, or Since You've Been Gone floating in through the door. And sometimes you just end up sitting in a parking lot, legs dangling over the back of a car, talking about everything and nothing. The air was cooler there, the night quieter. Someone would pull out a CD and slide it into the stereo, a burned mix with a Sharpie title. Maybe Late Drive or Chill Vibes. The first notes would play, and suddenly the whole night felt suspended in amber. The laughter softened, the headlights of distant cars glided by, and for a moment you felt infinite. If you were younger, maybe Friday night meant staying home, but even that had its own magic. The glow of the living room TV, the sound of popcorn popping, the comfort of being curled up in a blanket while TGIF sitcoms rolled one after another. Your parents talked quietly in the kitchen, your siblings argued over the remote, and the dog snored at your feet. The smell of pizza filled the air, and somewhere outside you could hear a car stereo fading down the street. The world felt big but safe, like it all fit neatly into that one evening. And when you finally went to bed, the night still hummed in your head. Maybe you lay there replaying the evening, the songs, the faces, the laughter. You'd scroll through your phone, rereading a text that said, "Had fun tonight," even though it was only 2 words. That was enough. The screen would go dark, and you'd close your eyes, still smiling. Friday nights in the 2000s weren't about where you went or what you did. They were about being there. The thrill of possibility, the feeling of connection, the sense that life was happening all around you, and that you were right in the middle of it. There were no endless notifications, no live streams, no need to prove you were having fun. You just were. And that was everything. There was a rhythm to those early 2000s weekends that felt perfectly ordinary back then, but now it feels almost sacred. Saturday mornings began slow, with sunlight sneaking through the blinds and the muffled sound of cartoons playing in another room. Maybe your mom was making pancakes. Maybe your dad was outside mowing the lawn, the smell of cut grass drifting through the window. The world wasn't rushing anywhere yet. You'd roll out of bed, hair messy, still half asleep, and shuffle to the kitchen where the counter was already cluttered with cereal boxes, Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, maybe Frosted Flakes if someone had gone grocery shopping the night before. The TV was always on. Saturday mornings were for reruns, commercials, and shows that didn't take themselves too seriously. That's So Raven, Kim Possible, Lizzie McGuire, Drake and Josh, they filled the air with laughter and color. You didn't multitask. You just watched. The commercials were part of it, too. Nerf guns, Lunchables, new McDonald's toys. Every jingle burned into your memory like a secret language of childhood. By noon, the day was yours. If you were a teenager, that meant heading out, maybe a trip to the video store, maybe just a long walk with friends. You'd grab your flip phone, maybe a few dollars for snacks, and tell your parents you'd be back before dark. There were no tracking apps or constant check-ins. Just trust and the freedom to get lost in the day. Blockbuster was its own world. The blue and yellow glow, the smell of plastic cases, the hum of fluorescent lights. Walking down the aisles felt like exploring endless possibilities. You'd pick up DVD covers, flip them over, read the summaries, argue about which one to rent. Maybe you'd grab The Fast and the Furious or Mean Girls or something random that looked fun. The sound of the scanner beeping as the cashier checked you out was the promise of a perfect night ahead. You'd grab popcorn and soda on the way out, the movie tucked under your arm like treasure. Later, when everyone gathered to watch, it felt like a small event. The lights were dim, the TV's reflection danced across the living room windows, and the opening credits filled the air. You'd quote lines, laugh too loud, and sometimes fall asleep halfway through, only to wake up as the menu screen looped quietly in the background. The sound of that looping music is something you never forget. It felt like the night itself was waiting for you to hit play again. If you weren't watching movies, you were outside. Neighborhoods were alive back then. Kids riding bikes, chalk drawings fading on the sidewalk, sprinklers hissing across lawns. Someone always had a basketball hoop above their garage, and games would start without planning. No one texted to meet up. You just showed up, and somehow everyone was already there. The air smelled like summer, sunscreen, asphalt, barbecue smoke. Shoes scuffed the pavement, the sun went down, and street lights flickered on one by one. Dinner was family time, even if no one called it that. You'd hear your mom's voice from the porch, calling you in. The kitchen was warm, the radio playing softly, maybe John Mayer, maybe Nora Jones, maybe some local station fading in and out. Plates clattered, the TV murmured in another room, and for an hour or so, everything slowed down. You'd talk about school, friends, maybe a movie you wanted to see. And if there was nothing to say, that was fine too. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. After dinner, the night stretched open. Maybe there was a local fair in town. The smell of fried dough, the sound of laughter, the thrill of cheap carnival rides that felt far more dangerous than they really were. Maybe it was just a trip to the gas station for snacks, or a drive around the block with music playing low. There was a kind of magic in not having plans and just letting the night happen. And when you finally got home, you'd end the day the way you ended most days, at the family computer. The monitor's glow cut through the dark, and you'd scroll through MySpace or chat with someone on AIM until your eyelids got heavy. Maybe you'd change your profile song. Maybe you'd update your mood with something cryptic like tired but happy. Then you'd log off, shut down the computer, and listen to that soft, descending chime that felt like closure. That was a weekend in the 2000s, slow, vivid, full of small rituals that didn't feel like much at the time. There were no hashtags, no stories, no pressure to document it. You lived it, and that was enough. It was the last era when time felt wide open, when a day could stretch forever, and every little thing carried its own quiet kind of joy. There was something comforting about the way Sunday felt in the 2000s. It was slower, softer, a day wrapped in the sound of lawnmowers and the smell of something cooking in the kitchen. The light always seemed different, too, warmer. You'd wake up later than usual, maybe to the sound of a radio playing in another room or the clink of dishes being stacked. The house felt half asleep, and so did you. The weekend wasn't over yet, but you could feel Monday waiting somewhere in the distance. Quiet but approaching. Mornings often started with breakfast that wasn't rushed. Pancakes, bacon, coffee, or maybe just cereal eaten straight out of the box while watching something comforting on TV. Sunday mornings had their own playlist. Meet the Press for the parents. Saved by the Bell reruns for you. Commercials filled with car dealerships and family restaurants offering kids eat free deals. The world outside was calm. The streets were emptier. The air felt cleaner. And even the dogs barked a little less. If it was summer, maybe your dad was out washing the car, the hose hissing against the driveway. If it was winter, maybe you'd all pile into the family van for errands, the grocery store, the pharmacy, the big box retail trip that somehow always took longer than expected. The aisles of Walmart or Target felt endless, fluorescent, familiar. You'd wander off, trailing your hand across the shelves of DVDs or peeking at the new electronics, chunky MP3 players, early digital cameras, maybe even the first flip phone with a tiny camera built in. The packaging alone made everything feel futuristic. You'd press your face to the glass of the game display, staring at Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, or Need for Speed Underground, wondering when you'd get to try them. There was something special about errands back then. They weren't just chores. They were outings. The sound of the scanner beeping at checkout, the cashier making small talk, the paper receipt curling in your hand, it all felt human. You'd leave with plastic bags swinging at your sides, the smell of detergent and gum filling the car, and maybe a soda sweating in the cup holder. Afternoons had a rhythm, too. The house would fill with music, maybe something from Norah Jones, John Mayer, or Coldplay, drifting through a home stereo. The sunlight would pour through the blinds, turning everything golden. Maybe your mom was folding laundry while humming along, or your dad was stretched out on the couch reading the paper. You might have homework sitting unfinished on your desk, but for the moment it didn't matter. The world outside could wait. Sometimes family came over, aunts, uncles, cousins spilling into the living room. You'd hear stories repeated 100 times, jokes that never got old, the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Someone always brought a dessert, maybe a Jell-O salad, maybe a tray of brownies, and everyone pretended to have just one piece. The TV played softly in the background, tuned to a football game or a Sunday movie marathon. The air smelled like roast chicken and something sweet in the oven dot by evening. The light outside dimmed, and that particular kind of Sunday sadness settled in. Not heavy, just reflective. You'd take a shower, get your clothes ready for school, maybe iron something if you were feeling responsible. The hum of the dryer filled the hallway. The smell of fabric softener clung to everything. You'd check your phone one last time. Maybe a few new messages, maybe nothing at all. You'd scroll through the same MySpace profiles you'd already looked at earlier, reread a chat from a friend, and change your status to something like ready for the week. Kind of dinner was simple, leftovers, soup, maybe pizza from the night before. You'd sit together in front of the TV, everyone quieter now. There was comfort in that silence. The kind that only exists when everyone knows tomorrow means routine again. When the last commercial faded and the credits rolled, someone would turn off the lights, and the house would slip into stillness. Later, lying in bed, you'd listen to the world winding down. The faint hum of the computer fan in another room, a car passing by outside, the whisper of wind through the blinds. You'd stare at the ceiling, thinking about the week ahead, but part of you stayed anchored in that moment. Warm, safe, half-awake dot that was Sunday in the 2000s, the reset button on life. No noise, no rush, no scrolling through endless feeds. Just a day that reminded you how small and steady the world could feel. It was a time when peace wasn't something you searched for. It was just there, woven into the fabric of ordinary things. You didn't need to chase it. You only had to live it. Every once in a while, the 2000s gave you those nights that felt like small pieces of forever. The kind of nights that didn't seem important at the time, but now, looking back, they glow in your memory like old film. Maybe it was a summer sleepover, maybe a house party, maybe just hanging out in someone's backyard until the stars came out. There was no schedule, no plan, just time stretching endlessly in front of you, filled with the laughter of people who, for a little while, made the whole world feel right. Sleepovers had their own rituals. You'd arrive with a backpack stuffed full of things you didn't really need. Snacks, pajamas, maybe a few burned CDs or a stack of DVDs. The night began with pizza, soda, and the kind of laughter that came easy because no one was thinking about tomorrow. Someone always brought a camera, and before long, the flash would start going off every few minutes. Someone making a goofy face, someone wrapped in a blanket, someone caught mid-laugh. The photos weren't posed. They just happened. And that was the beauty of it. The living room would slowly turn into a nest of blankets, pillows, and half-eaten bags of chips. The TV played movies everyone had already seen. Mean Girls, The Notebook, Anchorman, Napoleon Dynamite. You quoted every line, sang along to the soundtrack, talked through the serious scenes. At some point, someone would start flipping through the channels, and you'd end up watching some late-night infomercial or a strange show on MTV that you weren't supposed to. It didn't matter what was on. What mattered was the quiet comfort of knowing everyone was still awake, even if no one was talking dot. And then there was music, always music. Someone would plug in their iPod or pop in a burned CD, and the first notes of a song would fill the air. Sometimes it was slow, sometimes loud, but it always carried the same feeling, that strange mix of freedom and nostalgia, even while you were still living it. You'd pass the phone around, showing off new songs you found on LimeWire or sharing playlists from Winamp. Every song had a story. Every lyric meant something to someone. If you stepped outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of grass and asphalt. Street lights buzzed overhead, moths circling the bulbs. You could hear sprinklers in the distance, maybe the faint hum of a car passing on a nearby road. You'd sit on the curb, your knees pulled to your chest, talking about nothing, dreams, crushes, the future that still felt far away. The world was quiet, but your mind buzzed with possibility. Sometimes you'd sneak out for a walk, not far, just around the block or to the park down the street. The neighborhood looked different at night, still almost magical. You'd swing under the stars, your laughter echoing through the empty air, the sound of your shoes scraping against gravel. Maybe you'd lie in the grass, pointing at constellations you couldn't name, or just stare at the sky, feeling infinite. There were no photos of those moments, no videos, no proof they happened. Just the memory, and somehow that makes it feel even more real. When you came back inside, the house was dark except for the flickering light from the TV. Someone had fallen asleep halfway through the movie. Another person scrolled quietly through their flip phone, the glow of the tiny screen lighting their face. You'd whisper until the conversation trailed off, voices fading into half-dreams. The last thing you'd hear before drifting off was the soft hum of the air conditioner or the static crackle from the TV. The morning after always felt different. The light was harsher, the room messier, empty cans, blankets tangled on the floor, someone still asleep under the coffee table for no reason at all. You'd stretch, groggy but content. Someone would start making toast or reheating leftover pizza, and the smell would fill the room. You'd scroll through the photos you took the night before, laughing at blurry faces and red eyes. No one looked perfect. Everyone looked alive. Those nights weren't about adventure or chaos. They were about the kind of peace that comes from being surrounded by people who understood you, when you didn't have to explain yourself, when the world outside stopped spinning for a little while. That's what the 2000s did best. It gave you the space to just be. And maybe that's why those memories linger so vividly now. Because back then, happiness didn't need a post or a filter. It was a song played too loud, a photo that took 3 tries to get right, a 2 a.m. conversation that made you feel seen. It was small, quiet, fleeting, but somehow it meant everything. Every generation has its own kind of sound, a rhythm that instantly takes you back the moment you hear it. For the 2000s, it was a blend of guitars, static, and heart. Music wasn't just background noise then. It was how you lived, how you remembered, how you survived heartbreaks and celebrated everything good that ever happened. The radio, the burned CD, the tiny silver iPod, each one was a doorway into a moment in time. There was a song for everything. You'd wake up to the radio alarm clock playing Mr. Brightside or Complicated, brush your teeth while singing along to Hey Ya, and catch yourself humming in the end while walking to class. The world seemed to move in sync with the music. You didn't skip tracks. You let the song play all the way through, even the ones you didn't love, because that's just how it worked. Every note mattered. Every lyric stuck. MTV was still about music back then. After school, you'd rush home, drop your backpack on the floor, and turn on Total Request Live. The studio was full of screaming fans, and Carson Daly or La Anthony counted down the biggest hits of the week. It wasn't just entertainment, it was culture. Seeing your favorite artist climb the chart felt like a personal victory. You'd sit inches from the screen, waiting for that one video. Maybe Usher's Yeah. Maybe Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And when it came on, it felt like the whole day had been worth it. And then there was LimeWire, that green icon sitting on the desktop, like a forbidden portal. You'd spend hours searching for songs, typing in names, and praying you didn't accidentally download a virus. Every track took minutes, sometimes hours to download, and half the time it wasn't even the song you thought it was. But when it worked, when that progress bar finally hit 100% and the music started playing, it felt like magic. You'd burn it onto a CD, maybe add a few more songs, carefully choosing the order like a DJ. Then came the Sharpie. Summer 2004. Breakup Mix. Friday nights. Those discs were diaries in disguise. Every car had a CD wallet, thick, heavy, bursting with discs in plastic sleeves. You'd flip through them at stoplights, trying to decide which mood you were in. The CD player clicked, the track skipped once or twice, and then the beat dropped. The windows went down, and suddenly you were in your own music video, singing loud, off-key, and not caring who saw. If you weren't driving, you were plugged in. The iPod Mini in your pocket, the white earbuds tangling in your hoodie strings. You'd scroll through the tiny screen using that circular wheel, feeling the little clicks under your thumb. The screen didn't glow much, but you didn't need it to. You knew your songs by heart. Sometimes you'd listen with a friend, sharing one earbud each, your heads leaning close together. Half the sound, twice the connection. Music shaped identity then. What you listened to said everything about who you were. If you loved emo bands, My Chemical Romance, Taking Back Sunday, Fall Out Boy, it meant you felt everything deeply. If you played 50 Cent or T.I. or Kanye West, it meant confidence, rhythm, and swagger. If you had Coldplay or The Fray on repeat, maybe you were quiet, thoughtful, the kind who stared out bus windows imagining life as a movie. Concerts were something else entirely. It didn't matter if it was a stadium show or a small venue downtown. The energy was the same. The lights dimmed, the crowd roared, and for a few hours the rest of the world disappeared. You weren't thinking about tomorrow or your phone or who you were supposed to be. You were just there, hands in the air, heart pounding in your chest, shouting lyrics you didn't even fully understand. And when the lights came back on, you'd look around and see faces glowing, strangers smiling, everyone connected by the same sound. There was something raw about it all, the unpolished edges, the static in the speakers, the fact that you had to work for your music. You couldn't just stream anything instantly. You had to wait. You had to want it. And maybe that's why it still means so much when those songs play now, because every track carries the fingerprints of who you were when you first heard it, the way your heart felt, the people you were with, the world you thought you knew. Even now, if you close your eyes and press play on an old playlist, it all comes rushing back, the smell of your car, the buzz of a flip phone, the laughter of friends in the back seat, shouting lyrics out of tune. The 2000s didn't just give us music. It gave us memory with a beat. And somewhere on a scratched CD in a drawer, that version of you is still singing. Television in the 2000s was more than background noise. It was the pulse of the living room, the nightly soundtrack of ordinary life. Every home had a television that felt like a piece of furniture, heavy, boxy, with a faint static hum that filled the silence when it wasn't on. You'd turn it on and feel that flicker of light dance across the room, a slow fade from black to color, and then the world came alive. The remote control, slightly sticky from use, was passed around like a scepter of power. Whoever held it decided the mood of the night. Evenings usually started with the news. Parents sitting on the couch, half watching, half talking, the newscaster's voice steady and calm. After that came the good stuff. Sitcoms, game shows, dramas, little windows into other lives that somehow felt familiar. Friends was still running in syndication, and no matter how many times you'd seen it, you'd laugh again when Joey said something dumb or Chandler rolled his eyes. Malcolm in the Middle captured the chaos of family life better than anything else. The Office began creeping into homes, confusing people at first with its awkward silences, only to become something they couldn't stop watching. And that '70s show made everyone wish they had a basement like that. One full of laughter, inside jokes, and the kind of friendship that seemed to last forever. TV shows had a rhythm back then. You didn't binge. You waited. A new episode every week, sometimes ending on a cliffhanger that left you restless until the next one. If you missed it, you'd have to wait for a rerun or hope someone recorded it on a VHS tape. There was patience built into entertainment, and that waiting somehow made it sweeter. Reality TV was becoming the new obsession. It started with Survivor, Big Brother, and Fear Factor, and suddenly the world couldn't get enough of watching ordinary people in extraordinary situations. American Idol turned regular folks into celebrities overnight. Everyone had an opinion, everyone voted, and for a moment it felt like the country was sharing one big conversation. This simple life gave us Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie pretending to live like the rest of us. Pimp My Ride made us believe even a rusted-out car could become something spectacular. And the Osbournes turned a rock legend's chaotic household into must-see TV. Movies, too, had their magic. Friday nights meant trips to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, scanning rows of new releases and holding boxes like they were precious. You could smell the faint mix of plastic cases and microwave popcorn in the air. Maybe you picked Pirates of the Caribbean, Spider-Man 2, or The Lord of the Rings. Maybe you went for something lighter, Mean Girls, The Notebook, Napoleon Dynamite. Whatever it was, watching it wasn't just a pastime. It was an experience. You dimmed the lights, popped popcorn, and made a little theater in your own living room. The commercials were part of it too. The jingles stuck in your head. The slogans repeated at school the next day. I'm loving it. Can you hear me now? Wassup? They became part of the language of the decade, woven into daily conversations without anyone realizing. Cable channels each had their own personality. Nickelodeon was for cartoons and messy game shows that involved way too much slime. Cartoon Network had Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, and the strange late-night magic of Adult Swim. Disney Channel gave us early glimpses of future stars, Hilary Duff, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, faces that felt like friends, and MTV, even as it drifted from music, still captured the essence of youth. TRL, Laguna Beach, Cribs, Punk'd, and Jackass. It was wild, weird, and perfectly 2000s. Sometimes families watched together. Sitcoms that made everyone laugh, movies that made everyone cry. Other times you'd retreat to your room with a small TV set, the kind with built-in DVD players or rabbit ear antennas. You'd lie on your bed, lights off, remote in hand, flipping through channels just to see what was on. It didn't matter if you found something good. The act of flipping itself was calming. The world outside felt big, but your room, with its glow from the TV, felt like the center of it all. And when the night finally wound down, the credits would roll, the music would fade, and the station might even sign off for a few hours, replaced by static or late night commercials selling knives and miracle gadgets. You'd fall asleep to that gentle hum of static, the light fading across your walls, your mind still replaying bits of dialogue and laughter. Television in the 2000s wasn't just something we watched, it was something we shared. Every episode, every jingle, every finale was a piece of a collective rhythm. And even now, when those old theme songs play or a familiar line from a show resurfaces, it's like a door opening back into a time when evenings were simpler, warmer, and every channel felt like home. Every sound, every smell, every small detail of the 2000s felt like a world of its own. And nowhere was that more true than in the way we ate. Food wasn't just food. It was memory. It was the glue of daily life, the centerpiece of family time, and the fuel for every hangout, every sleepover, every late-night drive-through run that somehow tasted better after midnight. Mornings began with simplicity. Maybe a box of cereal with a cartoon mascot staring back at you, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Fruit Loops, or Honey Nut Cheerios if your parents were on a health kick. The milk was cold, the spoon clinked against the bowl, and the TV played softly in the background. If you had extra time before school, maybe you popped an Eggo waffle in the toaster, the smell of syrup filling the kitchen. If you were running late, it was a granola bar and a juice box on the way out the door. It didn't matter what you ate. What mattered was the routine. That comforting sameness. School lunches had their own flavor. The smell hit you the second you walked into the cafeteria. Pizza rectangles with perfectly unnatural cheese, chicken nuggets that somehow never cooled off, and chocolate milk in tiny cartons that always leaked just a little when you opened them. You'd trade snacks with friends like it was currency. A bag of Doritos could get you anything. Lunchables were gold, especially the ones with mini pizzas or ham and cheese stacks. You'd peel back the plastic, build each bite, and feel like you were eating something luxurious. Afternoons were ruled by snacks. Coming home, dropping your backpack on the floor, and heading straight for the pantry. Fruit roll-ups, Gushers, Dunkaroos, Pringles, Goldfish, the Hall of Fame of 2000s snacks. Every brand had a mascot. Every bag had its own crinkle sound that somehow made the food taste better. Maybe you washed it down with a Capri Sun, poking the straw through the silver pouch like it was a tiny victory. Or maybe it was a can of Surge, the neon green soda that felt like drinking lightning. Dinner time was different. It was still the family ritual. The smell of food drifted through the house. Maybe spaghetti, maybe tacos, maybe a frozen meal baking in the oven. You could hear the soft clatter of plates being set, someone calling from the hallway, "Dinner's ready." The TV in the next room might still be playing, but at that table, the world paused. It was a time to talk, to complain, to laugh, to tell stories about school or work. No phones, no distractions, just food and conversation. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes chaotic, but it was together. And then there was fast food, the unofficial cuisine of the decade. The golden arches glowing like a beacon at the end of a long day. McDonald's Monopoly pieces stuck to the side of the soda cup, each one holding the fantasy of winning a free burger or maybe a car. Taco Bell runs with friends, ordering way too much for way too little money. Late-night drive-thrus where the speaker crackled and someone in the back seat was laughing too hard to order. You'd eat in the parking lot, fries balanced on the dashboard, music low, the smell of salt and ketchup filling the car. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was freedom in its simplest form. Holidays were all about food, too. Thanksgiving spreads that covered every inch of the table. Christmas cookies that filled the house with warmth. And backyard barbecues that felt like a celebration of being alive. Paper plates, plastic cups, someone manning the grill with a beer in hand. Kids ran around with popsicles melting down their fingers, while adults swapped stories that everyone had heard 100 times before. The sound of laughter mixed with the hiss of soda cans opening, and somewhere in the distance, you could hear the faint buzz of a lawnmower. Even junk food carried its own nostalgia. 3D Doritos, cosmic brownies, Pop-Tarts, Go-Gurt, pizza rolls. These weren't just snacks. They were symbols of a time when flavor didn't need to be healthy to make you happy. Every bite tasted like freedom, like youth, like the simple joy of not overthinking things. There was a texture to eating back then, a warmth that wasn't just about what was on the plate. It was about who was sitting next to you, the sound of laughter echoing through a kitchen, the hem of a microwave counting down while you waited for your hot pocket to cool. Meals weren't curated, they were lived. And long after the plates were cleared, those small, ordinary moments stayed behind. The smell of syrup, the fizz of soda, the flicker of a candle on a dinner table that always felt like home. If the kitchen was the heart of the 2000s home, then the neighborhood was its soul. Life happened outside back then, not on screens, not in messages, but on sidewalks, driveways, and front lawns that seemed to stretch forever on summer evenings. You could tell the time of day by the sounds alone. The bark of a dog, the slam of a screen door, the echo of a basketball bouncing somewhere down the street. Every neighborhood had its own soundtrack, its own cast of characters, its own small world that somehow felt big enough to hold everything that mattered. Kids roamed freely then. Parents trusted the rhythm of the day to bring them home when the street lights came on. Bikes leaned against fences, scooters rattled over uneven pavement, and the smell of cut grass clung to the air. Helmets were optional, scraped knees were badges of honor, and every friend's house was a second home. You didn't text to ask if someone was around. You just showed up, rang the doorbell, and waited to see if they'd come outside. The rule was simple. If the shoes were on the porch, they were home. There were backyard barbecues that lasted long after the sun went down. Folding tables covered with checkered tablecloths. Paper plates bending under the weight of burgers and corn on the cob. Citronella candles buzzing with trapped moths. Someone always brought the portable speaker, playing a mix of country, early 2000s rock, and whatever pop hit dominated that summer. The air was filled with laughter, smoke, and the smell of lighter fluid catching flame. Kids darted through sprinklers, their squeals blending with the crackle of the grill. Neighbors leaned over fences to chat about nothing and everything. Block parties were events, not just gatherings. Someone would drag out a boom box, Another would tape off a section of the street for chalk drawings and roller blades. There'd be coolers full of soda and melting popsicles, card tables stacked with chips, and maybe a slip and slide laid across the grass, ready to turn into mud by the end of the day. Parents stood in clusters, sipping cheap beer from plastic cups, laughing about work and weather while the kids created worlds of their own. Even ordinary evenings had their own magic. Sitting on a porch swing, feeling the wood creak under you, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Fireflies began to appear, small and steady, like nature's own slow rhythm. Somewhere down the block, someone started mowing the lawn again just before dark, that faint whirring sound mixing with the chirp of crickets. The air was thick with summer, warm, lazy, full of the kind of silence that only exists when you have nowhere to be and nothing to check. And when the seasons changed, the world shifted with it. Fall meant leaves piling up along curbs, the smell of bonfires and wet pavement, the crunch of sneakers on cold mornings. Halloween brought back the magic of imagination, pillowcases full of candy, homemade costumes that never quite fit, the thrill of knocking on doors under dim porch lights. Winter meant snow days, radio stations listing off school closures as you sat cross-legged by the TV, waiting for your town's name to appear. You'd rush outside, bundled up, building forts and throwing snowballs until your hands burned. Then it was hot chocolate, steaming and sweet, warming your fingers as you pressed the cup to your face. Spring was renewal, muddy shoes, blooming lilacs, bikes coming out of garages again, neighbors reappearing after months indoors. There was always a sense of return, of starting over, of the world quietly waking up again. Even small-town streets felt alive in those years. The corner store clerk who knew everyone's name, the postman who whistled the same tune every morning, the dog that everyone swore belonged to no one and everyone at once. Those were the tiny threads that stitched daily life together. It wasn't glamorous or loud. It was gentle, human, real. There's a certain kind of peace that comes from remembering those days, when connection wasn't through Wi-Fi, but through presence. You didn't scroll to find comfort. You walked across the street. You didn't comment. You waved. There was always someone outside, always something happening, small moments that built the foundation of what home really meant. The neighborhoods of the 2000s weren't perfect, but they were alive, full of noise, warmth, and familiarity. And even now, when you catch the faint smell of charcoal or hear the buzz of a lawnmower in the distance, it's enough to take you back to those long, golden evenings when the world felt smaller, slower, and somehow just right. There was a quiet kind of wonder in how we discovered the world in the 2000s, through screens that still flickered, through sounds that still hissed, through the strange hum of machines that connected us to something bigger, but not yet overwhelming. The internet was still an adventure then, not a habit. You didn't scroll endlessly, you explored. Every click felt like uncharted territory. Every website like a door into someone's private universe. You'd sit down at the family computer, that bulky monitor with a tower that sounded like a tiny engine, and double-click the browser icon. The dial-up tone began its familiar screech, a sound that could wake the whole house. You waited. You always waited. But when that final, satisfying ding arrived, signaling a connection, it felt like stepping into another world. The web was smaller, but it felt infinite. You didn't need algorithms to tell you what you liked. You just followed curiosity. You might start on AOL or Yahoo, typing something vague like funny pictures or cool websites, and hours later you'd end up reading about movie trivia or downloading wallpapers of your favorite bands. Pages took forever to load, and that was fine. You'd sit there, chin on your hand, watching each line of text appear like it was being written in real time. There was magic in how personal the early internet felt. MySpace lets you build your own little world, choosing background songs, customizing HTML, arranging your top 8 friends like a social ranking system that could start or end friendships overnight. You'd spend hours perfecting your page, glittering backgrounds, scrolling quotes, photos edited with grainy filters. When someone left you a comment, it wasn't casual. It meant something. The notification sound made your heart jump. That little red alert was the 2000s version of validation. Simple, direct, and oddly sincere. Instant messaging ruled the evenings. AIM, MSN, Yahoo Messenger. It didn't matter which one you used, as long as you had the right screen name. Everyone's username was a mix of inside jokes, song lyrics, or numbers that meant something secret. You'd sit for hours staring at that buddy list, waiting for someone's name to light up. When it did, a wave of excitement hit, the kind that can't be replicated. You typed quickly, carefully, watching the typing indicator blink, waiting for the reply that always came just a little slower than you hoped. Conversations stretched late into the night, jokes, confessions, plans that never happened, feelings you didn't know how to say out loud. When someone signed off, the goodbye felt final. You'd stare at the empty window for a moment before closing it. Then came the rise of YouTube, a revolution that didn't announce itself, just quietly appeared. Grainy videos, strange comedy sketches, people filming themselves in bedrooms. It didn't look like TV, and that was the point. You could upload something, anything, and suddenly it was part of the internet. There were no influencers, no thumbnails, no rules, just raw, chaotic creativity. A song cover, a pet video, a poorly lit skit. Everything felt authentic, human, and free. Games on the internet were their own escape. Flash games on Newgrounds or Miniclip ate up hours of our lives. Tiny, pixelated worlds where you could build roller coasters, launch penguins, or dodge falling objects to the beat of techno music. Every school computer lab had its secret list of game sites hidden in bookmarks, shared quietly between friends like contraband. You'd sneak in a few minutes before the teacher noticed, minimizing the window whenever footsteps approached. Forums and message boards were the heartbeat of the early web, small communities that formed around every possible interest. Movies, video games, cars, books, music. It didn't matter how obscure your hobby was. Someone somewhere shared it. People wrote long posts, not for likes or followers, but because they wanted to connect. Strangers became friends, and in some cases even family. There was kindness there, a raw humanity that existed before anonymity turned sharp. Downloading music, photos, games, it all carried risk and excitement. LimeWire and Kazaa were digital treasure hunts, where you never quite knew what you were getting. Sometimes it was the song you wanted, sometimes it was a virus that crashed the family computer. You'd hear your parents yell from the other room when a pop-up storm took over the screen. and you'd rush to click every red X you could find. But you still went back, because that's how badly we wanted to discover that the internet of the 2000s wasn't a distraction. It was a frontier. It was the sound of a modem connecting, the smell of warm electronics, the glow of a monitor in a dark room. It was nights spent searching, building, chatting, creating, before everything became polished, before everything became endless. Back then you could log off, and when you did, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful, because the real world was still waiting just outside your window, humming quietly under the glow of streetlights' dot. There was something special about school, life in the 2000s, that mix of chaos and comfort, structure and freedom, the rhythm of days that all felt the same, but still managed to hold tiny stories you never forgot. Every morning began with that same routine, the blare of the alarm clock, the groan as you rolled out of bed, and the race to get ready before the bus came rumbling down the street. The backpack was always heavy, textbooks, binders, a lunchbox crammed somewhere near the bottom. You'd glance at your reflection in the hallway mirror, maybe slick your hair down with water, or adjust the wristband you never took off. Then came the sound, that low roar of a diesel engine outside, and suddenly the day had begun. The school bus was its own world. The smell of vinyl seats and diesel fuel, the loud chatter of dozens of half-awake kids. Everyone had their spot. The cool kids sat in the back, the quiet ones near the front, and the rest somewhere in between. Windows were etched with initials and scratched doodles. Someone was always listening to music on a CD player, the earbuds so loud you could hear every beat. Conversations blended together, gossip, laughter, arguments about who had the best cell phone. And when the bus turned the last corner, everyone sat up a little straighter, grabbing their bags like they were preparing for battle. Walking into school had a rhythm too. The slam of lockers, the squeak of sneakers on tile floors, the smell of pencil shavings and cafeteria food drifting through the halls. Posters covered the walls, school dances, fundraisers, anti-smoking campaigns with slogans that no one really paid attention to. Teachers stood in doorways, clutching coffee cups, greeting students with tired smiles. There was a comfort in the noise, in the chaos of it all. Classrooms were a mix of boredom and magic. The flicker of an overhead projector, the dry scratch of chalk on a green board. You'd stare out the window, watching the clouds drift by, counting the minutes until lunch. Every desk had carvings, initials, hearts, messages that outlived the people who wrote them. When a teacher wheeled in the TV cart, the room buzzed with excitement. It didn't matter what was on, Bill Nye the Science Guy, a documentary, even an old VHS about safety. It meant a break from routine. That low hum of the CRT screen turning on was the sweetest sound in the world. Lunch was freedom. The cafeteria roared with life, a sea of tables and trays. The line was always too long, the food always too questionable, but the conversations were the real meal. You learned everything at that table. Who liked who failed the math test, who was fighting after school. The smell of pizza and French fries mixed with laughter and secrets. If you were lucky enough to sit with friends, the noise faded, replaced by inside jokes and shared stories that would echo long after you left those halls. After lunch came the slow crawl to the final bell. Maybe there was gym class, The sound of sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, the thud of basketballs and shouts of half-hearted enthusiasm. Maybe it was art class, where the smell of markers and glue sticks filled the air, and for a little while you could just make something. The clock always seemed to move slower in the afternoon, each tick a reminder of how close you were to freedom. When the bell finally rang, it was chaos, lockers slamming, papers flying, the sound of laughter spilling into the hallways. You'd step outside, squinting against the sun, the cool air hitting your face. The day was over, but life was just beginning. You'd walk home with friends, stopping at the corner store for snacks or heading to the park for a pickup game. The worries of the day dissolved into laughter, music, and the slow comfort of being young and free. And yet, school wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. The smell of freshly printed handouts, the scratch of pencils during a quiz, the thrill of passing notes folded into perfect triangles. The nervous excitement before a presentation, the way the classroom felt before a snow day announcement, that collective gasp when someone got caught doing something bold. It was growing up in slow motion, one bell at a time. Looking back, those days feel smaller now. The halls narrower, the desks tinier, but the memories are bigger than ever. Because school in the 2000s wasn't just about learning. It was about becoming. It was about figuring out who you were, one lunch table, one mixtape, one friendship at a time. And even now, when you hear the distant sound of sneakers on tile or the creak of a school bus door, it all comes rushing back, that warm, noisy, ordinary kind of magic that shaped who we became. There was a kind of ritual to how friendship worked back then, before messages appeared instantly and before every conversation left a digital trail. Friendships in the 2000s were built slowly, like mixtapes, layered through time, memory, and 100 shared moments that no one ever thought to record. They weren't curated or calculated. They were lived day by day, between phone calls, sleepovers, bus rides, and handwritten notes folded with care. You could tell how close you were to someone by how many inside jokes you shared, how many burned CDs you traded, or how many times you'd spent hours talking on a cordless phone long after you were supposed to be asleep. Those phones had weight to them, plastic warm from your hand, the faint hum of static in the background. You'd lie in bed, lights off, whispering about crushes, parents, school, life. Sometimes there'd be long silences that didn't feel awkward, just comfortable. Because that's what friendship was then, a quiet kind of closeness that didn't need to prove itself. The way we kept in touch was different, too. You memorized numbers. You knew your best friend's house phone by heart, the rhythm of it pressed into your mind like a song. You didn't text to ask, "Wanna hang out?" You just showed up, knocking on the door, shouting through the screen, "Can you come outside?" And if their mom said they couldn't, you stood there for a few more minutes anyway, hoping she might change her mind. Plans weren't made weeks in advance. They just happened. Someone got a new game, someone's parents went out, someone found a few dollars for pizza. That was enough reason to gather. After school, friendships lived in motion. You'd meet at the park, kicking up gravel, taking turns on the swings while talking about everything that felt huge at the time. The test you failed, the teacher you didn't like, the person you thought maybe, just maybe, liked you back. You'd walk to the corner store together, digging through your pockets for spare change to buy candy or soda. You didn't need much. The walk was the point. You'd tell stories, exaggerate, laugh until your stomach hurt, and forget the world for a while. Weekends stretched long, filled with sleepovers and video games that lasted until the early morning. Controllers passed between hands, the glow of the TV lighting tired faces. Someone always fell asleep first and got pranked with marker drawings or shaving cream. You'd eat too much junk food, drink too many sodas, and by sunrise, everyone was delirious, happy, and a little sick from all the sugar. No one cared. Those were the nights that stitched people together. No filters, no highlights, just moments that felt infinite. Even fights felt different then. There were no public call-outs, no online drama, no screenshots. Just words, sometimes harsh, sometimes clumsy, and then apologies that came face to face. You could see when someone was sorry, when their eyes softened, when their voice cracked. And once it was over, it was really over. Forgiveness came easy, because deep down you knew you needed each other. Friendship also meant loyalty, unspoken, steady. It meant keeping someone's secrets, even the small ones. It meant walking them home when it got dark, saving them a seat in the cafeteria, covering for them when they were late. It meant sitting with them when they cried, even if you didn't know what to say. There wasn't pressure to fix anything. Being there was enough. That was the language of care before it had emojis. And then there were the photos. Disposable cameras filled with crooked smiles and blurry faces, taken at school dances, birthday parties, or parking lots behind fast food places. You never took them to show the world. You took them to remember. You'd wait days for them to develop, and when they did, you'd sit together flipping through the prints, laughing at every bad angle and awkward expression. Some went into wallets, others taped to mirrors, some pinned to corkboards beside movie tickets and friendship bracelets. Those collages weren't decoration. They were proof of connection. When you think about it now, friendship in the 2000s was messy, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. It wasn't about followers or group chats or stories that disappeared in 24 hours. It was about time, the slow, patient kind. It was about showing up, staying late, and saying goodbye only because your parents were honking in the driveway. There was a weight to the way people cared for each other. You could hear it in their laughter, see it in their effort, feel it in the silence between conversations. It wasn't constant, but it was real. And maybe that's why those bonds still linger in memory. Because they weren't stored in clouds or archives, they were built into the air of those days. Into the walks home, the late-night calls, the shared playlists. That's how friendship felt in the 2000s, lived, not documented. And maybe that's why it still feels eternal. Love in the 2000s had a different pulse, slower, shyer, and somehow more real. It wasn't an algorithm or a swipe. It was built through glances across classrooms, notes passed between desks, songs shared over burned CDs. Back then, falling for someone wasn't instant. It was gradual, layered through small moments that lived longer than they should have. A smile in the hallway, a message that made your heart skip, a phone call that lasted until the line went quiet. Crushes started in the simplest ways. Maybe it was someone you saw at lunch every day, someone whose name you wrote in the margins of your notebook, Someone whose MySpace profile you visited over and over just to hear what song they'd added. You'd stare at that top 8 and hope your name would appear there one day. Everything was indirect, hints hidden in a "I'm away" messages, cryptic lyrics posted as status updates, the occasional smiley face in a text that meant more than words ever could. Texting wasn't constant then. Every message carried weight because each one took effort. You'd press each button 3 times to get to the right letter, pausing before sending because you only had so many characters. And when your phone buzzed in your pocket, that small vibration that made your chest tighten, you'd flip it open in one motion, heart racing, pretending to act casual while reading the words. Sometimes it was something simple, like "hey," but somehow it felt like everything. The first phone calls felt monumental. You'd sit in your room with the lights off, twirling the cord or fiddling with your bracelet, pretending your voice didn't sound as nervous as you felt. You talked about nothing, favorite bands, weekend plans, complaints about homework, but it all felt like a secret universe shared between 2 people. When your parents picked up the other line to say, "Time for bed," you'd whisper goodnight, stretching it out as long as you could. Not wanting the moment to end. School dances were the stage for everything unsaid. The gym decorated with string lights and balloons, the smell of cheap punch and perfume in the air. The music was too loud, but no one cared. You stood with your friends in a circle, laughing, pretending not to notice who you were really looking at. And when the DJ finally slowed things down, when the opening notes of "You and Me" by Lifehouse or "I Don't Wanna Miss a Thing" filled the room, that was it. Someone would ask shyly if you wanted to dance. Hands on shoulders, arms around waists, both of you swaying awkwardly in the dim light. You could feel your heart pounding, your mind racing, wondering if this counted as a moment. It always did. Love wasn't about profiles or posts. It was about gestures, a borrowed hoodie, a burned CD labeled in black Sharpie, a doodle of 2 initials in a notebook margin. It was the smell of someone's cologne lingering on a sweatshirt, or the mix of fear and excitement when you saw their name appear online. You'd wait just long enough to not seem too eager before saying, "Hey." Sometimes that "hey" turned into hours of conversation. Sometimes it turned into nothing at all. But even the nothing felt like something. Heartbreak hit differently, too. There were no vague posts, no public fallout, just silence. A conversation that faded, a glance that didn't linger anymore, a song that suddenly hurt too much to listen to. Maybe you'd find out they'd changed their MySpace song, and somehow that told you everything you needed to know. You'd listen to your own playlist on repeat. Apologize by One Republic. Bleeding Love by Leona Lewis, letting every lyric sink deeper than it probably should have. And then, eventually, you'd move on, without ever really meaning to. The beauty of love in the 2000s was in how present it was. You couldn't rewind messages or scroll through history. Once it happened, it lived only in your memory. You had to pay attention. You had to feel it. The flutter in your stomach when you saw them across the hallway, the warmth of a hand brushing yours. The silence after good night that meant you didn't want to hang up yet. Even now, when you hear those old songs, the ones that filled every car ride, every heartbreak, every first kiss, it all comes rushing back. That innocent rush, that quiet ache, that endless hope that maybe, somehow, they felt it too. Love back then wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was clumsy, slow, and unforgettable, the kind that didn't need to be documented to last. Because the truth is, it never really left. It just found its way into the soundtracks of our lives, hiding between the notes of every song that once made our hearts beat faster. There was a certain kind of peace in the nights of the 2000s, the quiet that came after everything else slowed down. When the house finally settled, when the lights dimmed and the world outside turned still, there was this feeling that time stretched just a little longer. You could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a wall clock, the soft whir of a desktop computer cooling off in another room. It was the hour when everyone had gone offline, and the world felt softer, smaller, and strangely safe. Most nights ended with a glow, not from phones or tablets, but from televisions, computer monitors, or the dim lamp beside your bed. Maybe you were watching reruns of Friends or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air until the network switched to late-night commercials. Maybe you were on the family computer, sitting too close to the screen, the bluish light painting your face as you scrolled through MySpace or listened to music on Winamp. It was a ritual, that final moment of stillness before you had to surrender to sleep. Sometimes you'd fall asleep to the sound of a movie menu looping on DVD, a short melody playing over and over, half dreaming as the screen dimmed. Other times you'd leave the TV on mute, just for the comfort of light filling the room. The world didn't demand constant attention then. There was space between thoughts, silence between distractions. It felt okay to do nothing, to just sit and exist in the quiet. Bedrooms in the 2000s told stories about who you were. Posters lined the walls, bands, movies, maybe a celebrity crush. Shelves filled with burned CDs, action figures, candles, or cheap perfume bottles shaped like stars. The desk might have held a stack of school papers beside an old flip phone charging next to a lava lamp. Every object had meaning. Even the smallest trinket, a concert wristband, a folded note from a friend, a photo strip from the mall, felt like treasure. You didn't think about minimalism or aesthetic. You just collected pieces of life as it happened. Lying in bed, you could feel the weight of the day slowly fade. Maybe you'd replay conversations in your head, thinking about something funny a friend said, or something you wished you'd said differently. Maybe you'd stare at the glow-in-the-dark stars on your ceiling, waiting for sleep to come. And when it didn't, you'd reach for your CD player or iPod, scrolling through songs in the dark until you found the one that fit the moment. There was always one, the song that made everything quiet make sense. If you were lucky, there'd be a soft breeze coming through an open window, carrying the smell of night, cut grass, rain, or someone's laundry drying down the street. You could hear a car pass now and then, or the distant hum of a train that always seemed to sound sad, even when it wasn't. Somewhere a dog barked, then stopped. The world outside moved slowly, as if it knew everyone inside was resting. Some nights, you'd talk to someone until you both fell asleep mid-sentence. The phone pressed to your ear, the faint static mixing with the sound of your breathing. You didn't hang up, you just let it fade. Waking up to the deadline the next morning always felt bittersweet, like proof that someone had been there with you, even if only for a while. Weekends carried their own kind of midnight energy. You might have stayed up watching Adult Swim on Cartoon Network shows you didn't fully understand but couldn't stop watching. Or maybe you stayed up gaming with friends, the flicker of the TV reflecting off energy drink cans scattered across the floor. The laughter, the noise, the soft frustration of losing another round, all of it echoing through the night. There was something honest about those hours, when everyone was half tired but fully themselves. Then, eventually, the world went dark. The TV clicked off, the house exhaled, and everything stilled. You could hear your own heartbeat if you listened closely enough. The moonlight slid across your walls, and the day, all its noise, laughter, confusion, and hope folded neatly into memory. Those nights felt endless, peaceful, heavy in a way that made you aware of how alive you were. You didn't need to post about it or save it anywhere. You just lived it, fully, quietly, completely. And maybe that's what made it unforgettable. Because even now, when you close your eyes and think back, you can still feel that calm, that silence that belonged only to the 2000s, when the world was slower, the nights were longer, and the glow of a single screen felt like enough to hold the universe together. The summers of the 2000s had a kind of light that doesn't exist anymore. The days felt longer, colors looked warmer, and time didn't move the same way. You woke up when the sun was already high, the blinds glowing gold, the air thick with the sound of cicadas. There was no rush, no urgency, just the soft understanding that the whole day stretched ahead, waiting to be filled with anything or nothing at all. The first thing you noticed was the quiet, that gentle, suburban stillness before the world got loud. Maybe the distant sound of a lawnmower, maybe the soft hiss of sprinklers watering the yard. You'd wander to the kitchen barefoot, the tile cool against your skin, grab a bowl of cereal, and stand there eating it, dry straight from the box. The air smelled faintly like summer, sunscreen, grass, pavement warming under the sun. There was a freedom in those days that you can still feel if you think about it hard enough. No notifications, no endless feeds to scroll. You didn't wake up and check who posted what. You woke up and wondered who was around. Maybe you'd call a friend's house phone. Maybe you'd just hop on your bike and see where everyone ended up. Sometimes it was the park, sometimes the gas station down the road, sometimes someone's pool. It didn't matter where, the point was just being together. The world outside felt endless. You'd pedal down streets you'd memorized years ago, but somehow they always looked new in summer light. The tires hummed against the asphalt, the wind whipped through your hair, and every turn felt like a small adventure. You'd stop at the corner store for Slurpees that stained your tongue, bright red or blue, buy a bag of chips, and sit on the curb talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. Afternoons melted slowly. The heat shimmered above driveways, the smell of barbecue drifted from backyards, and someone always had a radio playing. Sometimes you'd sit in front of a fan, half asleep, watching dust dance in the light. Other times you'd grab a cheap plastic water gun and end up drenched, laughing until your stomach hurt. Every moment was small, ordinary, perfect. There were road trips too. Parents loading the car with snacks and CDs, the back seat filled with pillows and arguments about who got the window seat. You'd watch the world slide by gas stations, fields, faded billboards, diners with signs that hadn't changed in decades. You'd stop at rest areas with vending machines that never worked right. Stretch your legs and feel the warm air wrap around you like a blanket. Then back in the car, windows cracked, hair whipping, everyone singing along to songs that belonged to that exact year. Kelly Clarkson, Linkin Park, Outkast, Green Day, Avril Lavigne. Every chorus was a time stamp. Evenings were the best part. When the heat finally broke and the light turned soft and honey-colored, you'd sit on porches drinking cold soda from glass bottles, or lie on the grass watching clouds fade into stars. Fireflies blinked in the distance. The air smelled faintly of smoke from someone's grill, and laughter carried across yards. You didn't think about the future then. You didn't think about much at all. You just were, and then came the nights, the kind that hummed with life. Neighborhood streets glowed under amber lamps, and you'd walk barefoot on the pavement, still warm from the day. Someone always had music playing from a garage, a car stereo, a window left open. Sometimes it was a house party. Sometimes it was just a few friends sitting on the hood of a car talking about dreams that felt close enough to touch. When it finally got late, you'd head home slow, the sound of crickets following you. The porch light flickered as you climbed the steps. The screen door creaked, and the cool air of the house hit your skin. You'd wash off the day, the sweat, the dirt, the faint smell of smoke, and crawl into bed sunburned, tired, happy. The ceiling fan spun above you, the hum steady and soft. And before you drifted off, you'd think about how tomorrow would be just like today, and somehow that felt like the best thing in the world. Summers in the 2000s weren't about travel or plans or showing anyone where you'd been. They were about time itself, long, slow, golden time, the kind that stretched and shimmered and stayed. And even now, when you feel a warm breeze or smell cut grass in the air, some part of you goes back there, to the sound of laughter on quiet streets, to sticky hands from melted popsicles, to a world that moved just slow enough to remember how it felt to be alive. Every December in the 2000s carried its own kind of magic, a kind that started quietly and grew with every passing day. The air felt sharper, the world smelled faintly of pine and cold, and everything, from radio jingles to mall decorations, seemed to hum with the same rhythm. There was no algorithm reminding you it was the holiday season. You could feel it. It was in the frost on the windows, in the crunch of snow underfoot, in the way neighborhoods slowly transformed into constellations of colored lights. The first real sign of the season was the school classroom changing. Paper snowflakes taped to windows, bulletin boards covered in construction paper Santas, and that one classmate who always wore a red sweater just a little too early. Teachers were softer in December. Homework felt lighter, the air in the hallways smelled like hot chocolate and winter coats, and every lesson was a countdown to break. You could feel the excitement building, kids whispering about presents, about travel plans, about snow days that might cancel everything at home. The change was slower but steady. Boxes marked Christmas or holiday stuff came down from the attic, each one packed with pieces of memory. You'd unwrap ornaments that had been in the family for years, some chipped, some handmade, all irreplaceable. The lights always tangled, and every year someone promised to wrap them better next time. They never did. The smell of dust mixed with pine filled the living room as the tree went up. The first time it lit, those multicolored bulbs flickering softly. It felt like the season had officially arrived. There was a ritual to it all. The music came next. All I Want for Christmas Is You Last Christmas. Do they know it's Christmas? Playing on the radio, in stores, in the background of every commercial. You heard the same songs every year, and somehow they never got old. The mall became a world of its own. Decorations hanging from ceilings, the scent of cinnamon pretzels drifting through the air, the faint sound of carols echoing between stores. You'd wander with family, coat unzipped, fingers sticky from Cinnabon icing, scanning shelves for gifts you couldn't afford but wanted to give anyway. If you were lucky enough to get snow, the world outside changed completely. Streets muffled under a blanket of white, cars buried, the air glowing blue in the quiet. You'd wake up early just to see it, breath fogging the window as you stared out, knowing school was canceled. The first step outside was always a shock. The crunch, the bite of cold, the smell of fresh air so clean it almost hurt. Hours disappeared in snowball fights, forts, sledding hills, and red noses. When you finally came inside, soaked and freezing, you'd throw your gloves on the heater and watch the steam rise while a mug of cocoa waited on the counter. The marshmallows melted into a sugary film that stuck to your lips. It didn't matter. It was perfect. Christmas Eve had its own magic. The lights dimmed, candles flickered, music played softly from the stereo. Maybe there was a church service, maybe just family gathered in the living room, the TV playing a Charlie Brown Christmas or Home Alone for the 100th time. You'd sit there with the tree glowing beside you, gifts already piled underneath, and feel that strange mix of calm and excitement that only came once a year. The world outside could have been falling apart, but inside it felt whole dot, and then came morning. That quiet moment before everyone woke up, when the house was still dark except for the glow of the tree. You'd sneak out of bed, tiptoe across the floor, and stare at the presents waiting like secrets. Wrapping paper crinkled softly, boughs shimmered in the light, and the air smelled like cinnamon and coffee. When everyone finally gathered, messy hair, sleepy smiles, wrapping paper flying everywhere, it felt like time stopped. For those few hours, nothing else mattered. Not school, not work, not the world outside. Just laughter, warmth, and the sound of new memories being made, even after the holidays ended. That feeling lingered in the leftovers. The lights still hanging outside long after January came. The songs stuck in your head. The 2000s had a way of making even the simplest winters feel special. The world was quieter, gentler, and the glow of the season seemed to last just a little longer. And even now, when you catch the smell of pine or hear the faint sound of a Christmas song from that era, it's like stepping back into that living room again. The soft hum of lights, the warmth of family, and the slow, steady heartbeat of a decade that knew how to make even the coldest days feel warm. Every ending of a year in the 2000s felt like a movie's final scene, full of noise, warmth, and reflection, all blending into something beautifully human. As the holidays faded and calendars flipped, there was this sense of transition that didn't come from phone notifications or countdown videos online. It came from the air itself, colder, quieter, tinged with both nostalgia and hope. You could feel time moving softly but unmistakably. New Year's Eve had its own rhythm. The day began slow, like everyone was saving energy for the night ahead. Maybe your parents were cooking, maybe friends were texting from house phones or MSN, trying to organize plans. Someone's basement, someone's living room, a cousin's house with too many snacks and not enough supervision, anywhere with music, people, and the promise of staying up late. The TV was always on in the background, showing the Times Square broadcast. The ball drop wasn't just an event, it was a ritual. The same crowd, the same lights, the same voice of the host counting down as confetti drifted like snow through the air dot as the night grew. The anticipation built. The room glowed with soft light. Christmas decorations still half up. Paper hats and cheap noisemakers scattered on the table. People talked over one another, laughing about resolutions they'd never keep. The smell of food, chips, dip, maybe something baking in the oven, filled the air. Someone's playlist bounced from pop to rock to R&B, the hits of the year, one after another. Yeah. By Usher, Since You've Been Gone by Kelly Clarkson, Mr. Brightside by the Killers. Each song brought back flashes of the months before, the drives, the heartbreaks, the good days that already felt distant. And then came midnight. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8. You could hear it echoing from every room, every TV across the country. Glasses clinked, people hugged, fireworks went off in the distance. Someone shouted, someone cried, someone whispered Happy New Year, like it was a prayer. The clock reset, but for a moment everything froze. The world felt wide open again, full of possibility. Even if no one knew exactly what they were reaching for after midnight, the noise softened. The music slowed. The adults talked quietly. The kids grew tired, but refused to admit it. Maybe you sat by a window, watching fireworks fade, feeling that strange stillness that only comes after celebration. The snow reflected the streetlights, the world outside empty but glowing. You thought about the year that passed, about what changed, who changed, what stayed. There was always that mix of pride and regret, excitement and uncertainty. But mostly there was peace. January mornings were different. The world reset itself. Decorations came down, trees dragged out to the curb. Classrooms felt colder, quieter. People returned to routines, same routes, same schedules, but something small had shifted. A sense of starting over. Maybe it was just an illusion, but it was a comforting one. You bought a new notebook, promised to write more, to be better, to change something even if you didn't know what yet. Winter lingered, long gray afternoons. The smell of wet coats and coffee, the sound of boots squeaking on snow. But there was beauty in that, too. The stillness, the pause, nights spent at home, bundled under blankets, watching movies you'd already seen a dozen times. The Notebook, Finding Nemo, The Dark Knight. The flicker of the TV against the window, the steam rising from a mug, the quiet hum of a heater. The world outside might have been asleep, but inside, life was still gently moving, and somewhere between the cold of January and the slow thaw of spring, you'd feel it, that restless pulse that meant another year was beginning to take shape. New songs would appear on the radio, new shows on TV, new trends in school hallways. The cycle began again, and somehow it always felt fresh. That was the beauty of time in the 2000s. It moved gently, like waves instead of storms. You could feel the shift without drowning in it. Life wasn't measured by posts or updates. It was measured in moments. The clink of glasses at midnight. The slow drive home under falling snow. The first sunrise of a new year, pale and quiet, washing over the rooftops while the rest of the world still slept. You didn't know it then, but those New Year's nights were teaching you something. That change didn't need to be loud or fast. Sometimes it came softly, like a whisper at midnight, reminding you that the world keeps turning, the days keep coming, and somehow, so do you. There was something about growing up in the 2000s that made everything feel like it happened in slow motion, the kind of years you don't realize are shaping you until they're long gone. It wasn't just the things we did. It was the way we felt them. The first time you stayed up past midnight and felt infinite. The first time a song hit so hard it became your anthem. The first time someone told you they loved you and meant it. Life back then had texture, not smooth or shiny like now, but raw, imperfect, and full of edges that caught the light just right. It was a decade built on transition. The world was changing fast, faster than anyone realized, but it didn't feel like chaos. It felt like possibility. Flip phones became cameras, cameras became memories, and suddenly you could hold your life in your pocket. The internet was growing too, stretching its digital arms into every home, but it still felt human, small enough to belong to you. People built their own little corners online, each web page a reflection of who they were or wanted to be. There was still mystery in the web then, still wonder. Every discovery felt earned. Every connection, fragile and real. Music was the heartbeat of it all. You didn't just listen to songs, you wore them. You printed lyrics and taped them to your wall, wrote them in the margins of notebooks, burned them onto CDs for people who mattered. The right song could change your mood, your day, even your sense of self. You could walk into school feeling invisible, and 3 minutes of Linkin Park or Avril Lavigne could make you feel like you were starring in your own movie. The soundtrack of the 2000s wasn't just background noise. It was a mirror. Every beat carried a piece of who you were becoming. And then there were the moments that felt small but ended up lasting forever. The smell of rain on hot pavement after school. The sound of your name shouted across a crowded hallway. The thrill of walking into a store with $20 and feeling rich. The glow of the computer screen when someone finally replied to your message. The flicker of lights at a sleepover when the movie paused and everyone laughed for no reason. Life then wasn't perfect, but it was present. You weren't documenting it. You were living it. There was also a certain innocence to how people dreamed. The future felt open, unformed, waiting for you to reach it. College was an adventure, not a burden. Careers were ideas, not cages. The world was big, yes, but it felt reachable. You didn't think about algorithms or debt or digital footprints. You just thought about making it, somehow, someday. And even if you didn't know what it was, that didn't matter. Dreaming was enough. The friendships you made in those years carved deep lines into your memory. You might not talk anymore, but their laughter still echoes somewhere when a familiar song plays. You can still picture the way your friend's bedroom looked, or the smell of their house after school. You remember the inside jokes, the long walks, the promises made under the kind of night sky that only existed before everyone was staring down at a screen. Those friendships were pure, not because they were perfect, but because they were real in ways that can't be repeated. The world outside was changing. Wars on the news, new technologies, moments that would reshape everything. But most of it felt distant. Your own world was what mattered. The people, the songs, the tiny rituals that made you feel alive. You didn't yet understand how fast things could move, how easily they could vanish. You thought everything would stay the same songs on the radio, the same friends, the same laughter. And in that illusion of permanence, you found comfort. Looking back now, it's easy to romanticize it, and maybe that's okay. Because nostalgia isn't about pretending everything was perfect. It's about remembering the parts that were. The feeling of being fully in a moment. Before time began rushing so fast, it blurred the edges. The 2000s were the last years that felt truly human. Analog hearts beating in a digital dawn. We didn't know we were standing on a threshold. We didn't know what was coming next. We just lived. We just felt. And maybe that's why those memories still glow, because we didn't capture them. We carried them. They live not in folders or timelines, but somewhere deeper. In songs that still sound like summers that never ended. In photographs that have started to fade. In moments that can't be recreated, only remembered. Perfectly imperfect. Forever alive in the soft hum of who we used to be. Every decade leaves a mark. But the 2000s left something deeper. A kind of warmth that sits behind the ribs, flickering like old film light. Maybe it's because we didn't realize as it was happening that we were living through an ending, the last moment before everything went digital, before every thought, every photo, every word started floating in invisible clouds instead of being held, touched, and remembered. We didn't know that our messy, ordinary lives were about to be replaced by versions that lived on screens. And maybe that's why the memories glow so bright now, because they were real in a way that can't be replicated. There was beauty in how imperfect everything was. Photos came out blurry, red-eyed, overexposed, but you still printed them. You'd hold them in your hands, flipping through them slowly, the smell of photo paper and chemicals filling the air. Each one had weight, a physical presence that said, "This happened." Every scratch on a CD, every scuffed sneaker, every cracked phone screen told a story. Things didn't need to be flawless to be worth keeping. The scratches, the wear, the fingerprints, they were proof of life. You didn't document every second, but the moments you did capture mattered. They were deliberate. The disposable camera only had 24 shots, and you thought carefully before pressing the button. That's why those photos, crooked, grainy, full of laughter, still mean more than anything saved in a folder today. They were rare. They were chosen. Technology was beginning to change everything, but it still felt human-sized. The sound of a flip phone snapping shut. The hum of a dial-up connection finding its way online. The glowing green light of an Xbox turning on in a dark room. It wasn't seamless or instant, but that friction gave it texture. You could feel technology working. It made sounds. It buzzed, clicked, struggled. It felt alive in a clumsy, comforting way, like us. The 2000s were also the last time the world felt local. Communities weren't algorithms, they were people. The corner store clerk knew your name. The mail carrier waved every morning. You recognized cars by sound alone. The sputtering engine of your neighbor's old truck, the squeal of bike tires down the street. You didn't have to scroll to know what was happening. You just had to step outside. The world was smaller, slower, but somehow it felt big enough to hold everything you needed. And then there was wonder. Real, physical wonder. Getting your first iPod and realizing you could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. The first time you saw Google load in seconds. The first text you sent without hitting the wrong letter 5 times in a row. These things seem small now, but back then they felt like miracles. The world was opening up, but gently, giving you time to catch your breath. When you think back, it isn't just the objects or the music or the trends that stay with you. It's the feeling of being present, of sitting with friends in silence without needing to check your phone, of watching the rain hit your window without needing to post it, of living moments that were just for you, no audience, no record, only memory. That kind of peace doesn't exist the same way anymore, and maybe that's why we hold on to it so tightly. The 2000s weren't perfect. They had their heartbreaks, their awkwardness, their growing pains. But they had soul. They were the years between worlds, between landlines and Wi-Fi, between mix CDs and streaming playlists, between handwritten notes and instant messages. A bridge between touch and technology. We didn't realize it then, but we were the last generation to live with one foot in the physical world and the other in the digital one, to grow up before everything became permanent and temporary at the same time. Looking back now, the 2000s feel like a dream with edges, vivid yet fading. But maybe that's what makes them beautiful. Because in every memory, every burned CD, every laugh echoing from a flip phone speaker, every night drive lit by dashboard light, you can still feel it. The warmth of a decade that didn't need perfection to matter. It just needed to be. And it was. What made the 2000s unforgettable wasn't just what we had. It was what we didn't. We didn't have constant noise, endless updates, or the heavy pressure to perform our lives. We had room to breathe, space between moments, time to think. That silence between songs on a burned CD, that pause before someone texted back, it all created a rhythm that gave meaning to things. Life wasn't lived in high definition or instant replay. It was lived in pieces, half blurry, half beautiful, and somehow that made it feel more alive. There was an art to being bored. You'd lie on the couch staring at the ceiling fan, the blades turning in slow, lazy circles, the house filled with the quiet hum of summer air. You might flip through TV channels, land on a show you didn't plan to watch, and end up loving it. Or you'd grab a sketchbook, a guitar, a journal, something that made the hours pass slower in the best possible way. Out of that boredom came imagination, the kind that can't exist when every second is filled with distraction. You made up stories, wrote bad poetry, recorded songs on cheap microphones, filmed short videos on point-and-shoot cameras just for fun. The world didn't expect anything from it. You did it because it made you feel. Waiting was part of life too. Waiting for film to develop. Waiting for the radio to play your favorite song again. Waiting for someone to pick up the phone. It taught patience in a way that doesn't exist anymore. There was excitement in not knowing when or if something would happen. That uncertainty made everything sweeter. When the song finally came on or when the message arrived, you felt it in your bones. It mattered, Dot. There were also the quiet connections, moments that weren't about words at all. Sitting in a friend's car as the sun set, the windows down, a song playing softly in the background. Walking home in the dark after a long day, the sound of your own footsteps keeping you company. Sharing earbuds with someone, one in each ear, the music becoming a secret between you. These small, unspoken things built the fabric of memory. They taught you that sometimes the most meaningful experiences don't need to be captured. They just need to be lived. Every generation has its version of freedom, but ours was analog. It wasn't found in likes or views, but in moments: the first drive alone, the first late-night diner run, the first time you realized you could exist in the world without anyone watching. That freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet. It lived in independence and discovery, and knowing that you could disappear for a while and come back when you wanted. The world didn't need to know where you were to know that you were okay, Dot. There was trust in that kind of living. Trust in yourself and your friends in time. If you told someone you'd meet them at 7, you showed up. If you said you'd call, you called. Plans weren't backed up by GPS or check-ins. They were built on faith. You believed people would be where they said they'd be, and most of the time they were. That's what connection felt like when it was earned, not tracked. Even the mistakes of that era had meaning. The wrong turns on road trips because someone misread a paper map. The burned CDs that skipped halfway through a song. The phone calls you shouldn't have made. The messages you shouldn't have sent. They were human errors, small, imperfect proofs that you were trying, feeling, learning. You could erase them eventually, but not instantly. And that delay, that stretch of time between action and reaction, taught accountability, forgiveness, humility. The 2000s didn't need perfection to feel perfect. They were built on moments that slipped by quietly, unnoticed until years later, when you'd find yourself remembering them without even meaning to. The scent of sunscreen and concrete. The feel of cheap denim and static-filled hoodies. The glow of a streetlight outside your bedroom window. Blinking through the blinds as you drifted off to sleep, Dot. We were surrounded by simplicity, and maybe we took it for granted. But looking back now, that simplicity feels sacred, because within it we found everything: friendship, love, creativity, purpose, and peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you aren't being watched, measured, or compared. The kind that lets you be fully yourself, quietly and completely. That's what the 2000s were. A decade of pauses, of space between things, of learning how to live without needing to capture every breath of it. It wasn't about nostalgia then, it was just life. Messy, real, unfiltered. And maybe that's why it still echoes so loudly now. Because in all that silence, we found the sound of being human. Dot. The funny thing about nostalgia is that you never feel it while you're living the moment that will one day break your heart. The 2000s felt ordinary while they were happening, just another stretch of life to move through. But now, every sound, every object from that time feels charged with emotion. The click of a CD player, the whine of a dial-up connection, the chirp of a Nokia ringtone, they all hit like ghosts of a world that disappeared without saying goodbye. Back then, you didn't realize you were watching the last sunset of a simpler age. There's a particular stillness when you think back to those days. The nights when the streetlights hummed and the stars seemed brighter, when the air outside smelled like asphalt cooling after a hot day. You'd walk home slowly, your sneakers scuffing the pavement, your mind filled with songs and thoughts that didn't need to go anywhere. You didn't need to capture the moment. You were already in it. There was nothing to perform, no invisible audience waiting for updates. The only thing that mattered was the person beside you, or maybe just the music in your ears. The world felt personal then, almost small enough to fit in your hands. What you didn't see at the time was how those small, ordinary moments were quietly shaping who you'd become. Waiting for a friend to call back taught patience. Getting lost on the way to a concert taught self-reliance. Falling out with someone and making up again taught forgiveness. Every part of life required effort, and that effort gave it weight. You had to earn your experiences. Even downloading a single song took minutes of searching, waiting, hoping the file wasn't mislabeled or corrupted. When you finally pressed play, you appreciated it more because it had cost you time. And time was precious dot. You can almost trace the decade in textures and sounds. The smooth plastic of a flip phone clicking shut after a long talk. The feel of a stack of photos still warm from the printer. The hum of a CRT monitor that filled the room with a faint electric buzz. The crackle of an FM station fading in and out during late-night drives. Every detail grounded you in a world that was tangible. Nothing existed purely in the cloud. Everything had a presence. You could touch it, hold it, pass it around. And in that physicality, there was connection. Even the light looked different back then. The way the afternoon sun came through the blinds, striped across your walls, illuminating the posters that defined you, maybe a band, a movie, a quote you half understood but felt deeply anyway. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old electronics, maybe the perfume or cologne of someone you liked. Music drifted through the air, static-filled but perfect. And you'd lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange comfort of being alone, but not lonely. The world outside was slower, quieter, easier to love. There was no rush to become someone. You grew gradually, piece by piece, year by year. Mistakes didn't follow you online forever. You could change, disappear for a while, come back different, and no one expected you to explain it. The world gave you privacy, and that privacy gave you room to breathe, to fail, to grow. There was beauty in not being known by everyone. Your world was the people you could touch, call, sit beside. The rest didn't matter. And that's what we lost when the noise took over. The silence that once connected us, the pauses, the waiting, the mystery. The 2000s were full of them. Spaces between words, between songs, between heartbeats. You didn't need to fill every one. You could just let them exist. Those quiet stretches of nothing were where life actually happened, in the car rides, in the waiting rooms, in the long walks home. You might not have realized it then, but those empty spaces were sacred. Looking back now, maybe that's what we're really nostalgic for. Not just the music or the fashion or the gadgets, but the slowness, the breathing room, the ability to live life without having to prove it. The 2000s weren't perfect, but they were human. The kind of human that can't be coded, streamed, or saved. They live only in memory now, imperfect, fleeting, and more precious because of it. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Time has a way of blurring the edges. But the 2000s remained strangely sharp, not because of what they had, but because of what they felt like. They were warm and perfect years that carried both innocence and awakening in the same breath. You were old enough to dream, young enough to believe, and somehow caught in the middle of a world shifting under your feet. Everything familiar, the sounds, the faces, the places, felt permanent, like they'd last forever. You didn't know you were living inside something that would one day be called the past. There was comfort in how predictable life was. You could trace your days through familiar rituals, waking up to the sound of an alarm clock that buzzed, not beeped, scrolling through a flip phone calendar with pixelated numbers, hearing the same morning radio show every day on your way to school or work. You knew the DJ's voices by heart. You knew the commercial jingles, the order of songs on your favorite CD, the pattern of your neighborhood when you walked home. It was repetition, but it never felt dull. It was grounding. It reminded you that you belonged somewhere. The world around you was more tangible, more textured. Malls were still the heartbeat of social life. The smell of pretzels, new clothes, and perfume blended into something uniquely nostalgic, an atmosphere of youth and endless possibility. You could spend an entire afternoon wandering stores without buying a thing, just trying on identities. A band tee at Hot Topic, a hoodie from Hollister, sneakers from Foot Locker. Every choice felt like a small statement of who you were, or who you were becoming. And when you ran into people you knew, not online but in real life, it was exciting, unpredictable, real. Conversations weren't curated. Moments weren't planned. You couldn't edit what happened. You just lived it. The same was true for music. Every song on the radio was a shared experience, something everyone around you had heard, even if they didn't like it. It connected you. You turned the volume up, windows down, and let the chorus fill the air. If a track came on that you loved, it didn't matter what you were doing. You stopped, you listened. Music was still discovery then, not background noise. You didn't just shuffle through it. You chased it. You waited for it. And when it hit, it stayed. There were moments of quiet joy, too, the kind that never made it into pictures or journals. Coming home after a long day and feeling the first wave of warmth hit as you stepped through the door. Hearing your mom or dad call from the kitchen, asking how your day was, before you even dropped your backpack. The smell of dinner, the faint hum of the TV, the way the lights glowed softer in winter. You didn't think much of it then, but those moments built the foundation of peace you still search for now. Outside, the world felt smaller, but in a good way. There was still mystery, still discovery. You couldn't instantly see every destination on a map. You had to go there. Getting lost wasn't failure. It was part of the adventure. You'd drive with no GPS, following intuition and road signs, and somehow always find your way back. Every trip, every wrong turn, became a story worth retelling. The act of not knowing was exciting, not frightening. The 2000s were a bridge between the slow pulse of the past and the high-speed hum of everything that came after. You could feel the tension even then, the rise of technology, the pull of connection, the first hints of a future that would never slow down again. But back then, it was still balanced. You could go online without losing yourself. You could disconnect without guilt. The digital world was a door, not a home. Maybe that's why when we think back, those years feel brighter than they were, because they still belonged to us, to our senses, to our bodies, to our laughter and our patience. They were the last years before everything became constant, before silence became rare. The world was changing, but it still had a heartbeat you could hear, steady, human and full of life. And even now, when the noise of the present feels too loud, you can still close your eyes and hear it. That steady hum of a decade when life was slower, smaller, but somehow bigger at the same time. When connection meant presence, and happiness wasn't something you chased, it was something you noticed. When people talk about nostalgia, they usually mention the big things, the music, the fashion, the gadgets, the pop culture. But the soul of the 2000s lived in the small things, the details so ordinary at the time that no one thought to remember them. The way your shoes squeaked walking into a Blockbuster on a Friday night. The faint smell of buttered popcorn and plastic DVD cases. The flicker of fluorescent lights bouncing off the aisles as you scanned row after row, tilting your head to read the covers. You'd pick up a movie, flip it over, read the blurb, even though you already knew which one you wanted. But that was the ritual. The choosing was part of the joy. There was a rhythm to those nights. You'd rent a couple of movies, maybe grab a snack, and head home under the quiet glow of streetlights. The drive felt longer than it was, the radio low, the windows slightly fogged. And when you finally got back, the rest of the night was pure comfort. You'd dim the lights, toss a blanket on the couch, and let the movie play while the smell of microwave popcorn filled the room. Maybe your family watched together, maybe it was just you, but either way, it felt like home. That soft flicker of light from the screen, the sound of the DVD menu looping long after the credits ended. It all became part of the atmosphere of those years. Even something as small as a mall food court carried that same energy. The echo of footsteps on tile, the murmur of 100 overlapping conversations, the smell of orange chicken and pretzels and coffee blending into something familiar. Teenagers sitting in groups, laughing too loud, pretending they didn't care who was watching. You could spend hours doing nothing, just walking, talking, existing in the soft buzz of the crowd. Nobody was taking pictures. Nobody was posting. You were there, and that was enough. Weekends had their own pulse. Saturday mornings were slow, sunlight spilling through curtains, the smell of breakfast drifting from the kitchen, cartoons or music playing in the background. You'd pull on jeans, maybe a hoodie with a band logo, and meet up with friends somewhere that didn't matter, a park, a parking lot, someone's garage. You talked for hours about nothing and everything, the kind of conversations that meant more than they seemed. Plans were made on the fly, and sometimes they didn't happen at all, but that was fine. Just having time, open, unplanned time, felt like a kind of wealth. Sundays carried their own quiet beauty. The day before life restarted. Maybe you'd do chores, maybe you'd visit family, maybe you'd just sit and let the day unfold. There was always a sense of calm, a small ache for something you couldn't name, part rest, part reflection, part anticipation. The smell of clean laundry, the hum of vacuuming, the glow of a sunset coming through the blinds. You could feel the weekend slipping away, but you didn't rush it. You let it fade, soft and slow, like the end of a good song. and school, for all its monotony, was the anchor that tied it all together. You knew the smell of the hallways, the sound of the bells, the faces you passed every day. There were teachers you loved, teachers you hated, and moments in between that made up the rhythm of growing up. The handwritten notes folded into perfect triangles, the doodles in the margins of your notebook, the countdown to the final bell. All of it was life in motion. The small things carried meaning because they were yours. They weren't shared, analyzed, or replayed. They existed only in your memory, personal, fleeting, precious. That's what made the 2000s different. The world hadn't yet turned everything into content. Moments didn't need an audience to matter. The simple act of being somewhere with someone doing nothing was enough. If you close your eyes, you can still feel it. The warmth of a couch after a long day, the hum of a game console booting up, the gentle chaos of people talking over each other at dinner. It wasn't spectacular. It was real. And maybe that's why it hurts a little when you think back. Because somewhere along the way, life got sharper, faster, louder, and those small, ordinary moments, the ones we barely noticed, became the things we missed the most. The 2000s weren't just a time. They were a texture, a temperature, a heartbeat. And if you ever get quiet enough, you can still hear it, steady and soft, beating just beneath the noise of everything that came after. Every generation believes their youth was the last one that mattered, but in the case of the 2000s, it might actually be true. It wasn't because the world was perfect. It wasn't, but because it was real, tangible, messy. You could still feel the weight of things, the friction of waiting, the texture of time moving at its own speed. The world hadn't been flattened into pixels yet. It still had corners and cracks, and somehow that made everything feel alive. The 2000s were the last decade where analog and digital lived side by side, both fighting for space in our hands. We still wrote on paper, still printed photos, still memorized numbers, but the future was already glowing faintly on our desks and in our pockets. We lived between two worlds, one you could hold and one that held you. And at the time, it felt balanced. You could plug in and unplug without guilt. You could be online without disappearing. You could disappear without being forgotten. There was trust in the world then. Trust that people meant what they said, that plans would happen, that memories would last even if you didn't save them. Maybe that's what made those years feel so full. They demanded participation. You couldn't just observe your life. You had to live it. You had to show up, make the call, knock on the door, wait outside. There was a physicality to connection that made it sacred. We were still learning how to be connected, but we hadn't yet forgotten how to be alone. Nights spent in solitude didn't feel like loneliness. They felt like breathing space. You could sit in your room with a book, a CD, or just silence, and it was enough. The hum of the computer fan, the sound of the neighbor's TV through the wall, the rustle of trees outside your window, that was company. You were never truly isolated because the world still spoke in quiet ways. There was an honesty to boredom back then. You couldn't swipe it away. You had to sit with it, wander through it, find something on the other side. And sometimes that's when the best parts of you showed up, in the middle of the stillness, when your mind started to create instead of consume. You picked up a guitar. You started sketching. You wrote letters you never sent. You stared at the ceiling and dreamed. Boredom was the soil where imagination grew, and we didn't know we'd soon pave it over with constant noise. Even the mistakes of the 2000s carried weight, maybe especially those. Saying the wrong thing face to face, missing a call that actually mattered, losing someone's number and never finding it again. The world didn't hand you endless do-overs. You learned through loss, through silence, through effort. That sting, the kind that stays for a while, built resilience. It made every yes, every sorry, every I miss you feel more real. Because it cost something, and beneath it all, there was a sense of unity that's hard to describe now. The world felt smaller in the best way, not because of the internet, but because of experience. Everyone was watching the same shows, hearing the same songs, waiting for the same movies to come out. Friday nights meant the world to teenagers everywhere. We laughed at the same jokes, memorized the same quotes, shared the same cultural heartbeat. Even strangers felt familiar. You could mention a song, lyric, or a TV character, and someone across the room would smile in recognition. That shared rhythm gave life texture. Now, when you think back, it isn't just the nostalgia for youth. It's nostalgia for the way life used to feel. The slowness, the waiting, the mystery, the patience built into every part of the day. There was beauty in not knowing everything. You didn't have instant answers, so you wondered more. You imagined more. And maybe that's what made the world feel magical. Not because it was perfect, but because it was full of things you hadn't yet discovered. The 2000s were the last time the world felt analog enough to be touched, and digital enough to feel infinite. The last time silence wasn't something to escape, and connection wasn't something to fear. A decade that existed between eras, not yet online, not yet lost, where people still looked up instead of down, still talked instead of typed, still felt the world instead of scrolling past. It wasn't the technology that made that decade golden. It was the people we were before the noise began. People who paid attention, who waited, who felt deeply and quietly. People who lived in a world that wasn't trying to sell them constant distraction. A world that gave them the grace of stillness. Maybe that's why it stays with us, because those years remind us what being alive actually felt like. Looking back, it's strange how ordinary the 2000s felt when we were inside them. We didn't think we were living through something special. We weren't trying to make history or brand our lives into memory. We were just existing, moving through days that felt simple on the surface but rich underneath. The 2000s didn't announce themselves as a golden era. They just were. And maybe that's the secret to why they linger, because nothing about them tried too hard. They were soft, natural, human. You can trace those years in textures. The rough denim of low-rise jeans, the slick plastic of a CD jewel case, the glow of a lava lamp in a dark bedroom, the way your fingers smudged the buttons of a Game Boy Advance or left faint prints on a Nokia keypad. Life had friction. You could feel it, the weight of things, the resistance of time. Every object had a purpose. Every sound had a place. Even the pauses had meaning. The click between songs on a playlist, the static before a phone call connected, the soft delay when you pressed play on a DVD. Those seconds, those in-between moments, were part of the rhythm of living. There was something sacred about waiting then. Waiting for photos to be developed, waiting for a crush to call back, waiting for Friday to finally arrive. Waiting was how you learned to savor things. Patience wasn't a flaw. It was part of the story. The slowness gave everything weight. A new album release meant excitement for weeks. A handwritten letter meant effort and thought. Even TV felt ceremonial. An episode you couldn't pause or replay became an event, a collective experience shared across living rooms everywhere. When something aired, it mattered not, and yet for all its simplicity, the 2000s weren't naive. They carried this quiet optimism, a belief that the future would keep getting better, that technology would connect us without changing us. We didn't realize we were standing at the edge of something huge. We didn't see the flood coming. We thought the world would expand without losing its heart. That belief, that innocent kind of hope, might be the most 2000s thing of all. It was a time defined by contradictions that somehow made sense together. We were independent but connected, restless but content, curious but grounded. You could spend an entire day alone and not feel isolated because solitude wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space to think, to dream, to miss people, to look forward to seeing them again. That space has all but disappeared now, and maybe that's why those years feel so golden. They gave you room to be. The friendships from that time hold a certain glow too. You can still remember the laughter, the long conversations that drifted between nonsense and truth. You remember walking home in the dark, the sound of gravel under your shoes, the streetlights flickering overhead. You remember sleepovers that lasted until sunrise, your faces lit by TV static, the taste of soda that had gone flat hours ago. You didn't need to capture any of it. You didn't even think to. The memory was enough. It still is. And then there's the soundtrack, the pulse that runs through every memory. The songs that turned into bookmarks for entire seasons of your life. You can still hear them, still feel the exact places where they belonged. In the car, in your headphones, in the background of nights that never needed a reason. Music then wasn't just something you listened to, it was something you inhabited. Every lyric, every riff, every beat carried the emotional language of a decade that somehow managed to be both loud and gentle. It's easy to say now that those years were simpler. Maybe they were. Or maybe we were just more present, not because we tried to be, but because there was no other option. You couldn't multitask existence. You couldn't scroll through your life while living it. You had to experience it, one thing at a time. You had to feel. And that's what the 2000s really were. Not just a decade, but a feeling. A warm, unpolished, analog heartbeat. A reminder that beauty doesn't have to be curated. That connection doesn't have to be instant. That time doesn't have to be fast to be full. They were the last years that truly belonged to us. The last breath before everything went quiet and loud all at once. The last decade where being alive felt simple enough to notice. If you could step back into a single day from the 2000s, it wouldn't be the big ones you'd choose. Not graduation, not birthdays, not milestones. It would be one of the quiet days, the kind that didn't seem to mean anything at all. A random Wednesday in 2004 or a summer night in 2007. The kind of day where the light came through your window just right, where the music you played matched your mood perfectly, where everything felt steady and familiar. You wouldn't remember what you wore or what you ate, but you'd remember how it felt, the peace in knowing you didn't need to be anywhere else. There's a kind of magic in ordinary days like that. You'd wake up to sunlight creeping across your wall, your alarm clock blinking a red digital time, the faint smell of laundry detergent still clinging to your pillow. You'd stretch, stare at the ceiling for a while, maybe hit snooze just because you could. Downstairs, the TV might already be on, the morning news, a cereal commercial, the sound of plates clinking in the kitchen. The house was alive in its quiet way. Someone making coffee, someone running late. It was a world that didn't need to be photographed to be remembered. Stepping outside felt different then, too. The air wasn't just air, it was atmosphere. You could smell seasons changing, feel temperature shifts not from weather apps, but from instinct. The sunlight seemed thicker somehow, the shadows softer. You noticed things because your eyes weren't always full of screens. The sound of birds, the texture of concrete under your shoes, the faint hum of electricity from a power line. You felt present. The world had more edges because you weren't dulled by constant distraction. Even errands had character. Going to the grocery store with your parents wasn't just a task, it was an experience. The cold air of the freezer aisle, the soft squeak of shopping cart wheels, the familiar faces of cashiers who knew your name. The beeping of scanners mixed with quiet pop songs from overhead speakers. You'd linger in the magazine section, flipping through glossy pages, reading about movies coming soon or bands about to tour. Everything felt slower, smaller, and safer. Afternoons drifted by like scenes from a movie you didn't know you were starring in. You'd sit on your porch or at a bus stop, tapping your foot to a song only you could hear. Maybe you had a notebook in your backpack, maybe a few crumpled photos, maybe a letter you never planned to send. You didn't know it then, but you were building your own mythology. A version of youth that would glow brighter in memory than it ever did in real time. Even the nights had their rhythm. The sun would sink, the sky would fade to that deep blue that only existed in those years, and you'd feel the world exhale. Street lights flickered on one by one. The smell of dinner drifted from open windows, and somewhere the sound of laughter spilled into the air. You might have walked with friends or stayed home playing music too loud, or lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above you. It didn't matter what you did. It mattered that you were, because the 2000s weren't about big moments. They were about presence, about being where your feet were, about letting the world unfold without rushing to catch it. You didn't need to share everything you saw. It was enough just to see it. You didn't need to record every laugh. It was enough just to hear it. That's what made life feel full. Not the proof of it, but the experience of it. Now, when you think back to those ordinary days, there's a softness to them. Not sadness, exactly, but something close. A gentle ache. The kind that reminds you were lucky to have lived in a time before everything became constant and loud. The kind that makes you wish just for a moment that you could go back to that porch, that song, that quiet day that meant nothing and somehow everything, because maybe that's the truest form of nostalgia, not for things, but for stillness, for the feeling of enough. For the days that passed without fanfare, leaving behind nothing but warmth. The 2000s were full of those days. You didn't know it then, but they were the best kind, the kind that would one day live forever in the back of your mind, glowing softly like sunlight through your old bedroom window dot in the end. What made the 2000s so unforgettable wasn't just the things we had, the flip phones, the CD players, the slow computers, or the songs we kept on repeat. It was the way life felt. It was the rhythm of a world that still breathed between moments. The quiet after the dial-up tone faded. The glow of a TV left on too long. The laughter that filled rooms before anyone thought to pull out a camera. It was the last decade that belonged entirely to the real world, the last time our lives existed mostly off-screen. We didn't know it was ending. Nobody ever does. You never realize you're living through a golden time until it's long gone, until the noise of the future drowns out the small, familiar sounds that used to shape your days. The clatter of keys on a family computer, the soft slam of a flip phone, the way music sounded through cheap car speakers as you drove nowhere in particular, windows down, world wide open. Back then, you weren't trying to document your life. You were just living it. And maybe that's what made it glow. The 2000s taught us something without meaning to, that happiness was never in the grand things. It was in the pause, in the wait, in the space between one moment and the next. It was in a burnt CD passed to a friend, in a movie night that stretched into morning, in the slow crawl of a loading bar on a computer screen where patience became part of the experience. Life was slower, but it was alive. It asked you to notice, to pay attention to the small, fleeting details that made up who you were. And we did notice. We noticed everything. The smell of wet pavement after summer storms, the way neon lights reflected off rain-soaked streets, the sound of friends' voices echoing down empty hallways after school, the feel of your favorite hoodie, worn soft from too many washes. Every texture, every sound, every color stuck to you. And when you look back now, it's not just memory, it's a sensory map of who you used to be. The world was stitched into you. Somewhere along the way, things changed. The screens got brighter. The silence got shorter. The pauses between moments disappeared. Everything became faster, easier, louder, but not necessarily better. And still, the 2000s linger in the background, humming softly, reminding us of a time when life didn't need constant motion to feel full. A time when we reached out to each other because we wanted to, not because we were prompted to. When connection wasn't a currency, it was simply what it meant to be human. That's the real nostalgia, not just for the objects or the songs, but for the way we existed together, the way friendship felt like home, the way love felt handwritten, the way the world felt wide and open and slow enough to dream inside of. We grew up in that quiet space, half analog, half digital, where imagination still had room to run wild. And even though the world moved on, some part of us is still there, sitting on a porch as the street lights flicker on, the night just beginning, the air filled with possibility. If you close your eyes, you can still feel it. The warmth of a CRT screen, the sound of a ringtone you haven't heard in years, the faint hum of an old computer fan, the laughter from a friend who's drifted somewhere into adulthood, just like you. It all still lives there, in that corner of your mind where time folds in on itself, and everything is golden again. The 2000s weren't perfect, but they were honest. They were the bridge between what the world was and what it would become. A decade caught between the tangible and the infinite, between letters and emails, between silence and noise, between growing up and letting go. And maybe that's why, even now, we still find ourselves reaching back, not to escape, but to remember who we were when life was simple enough to notice, and real enough to touch Dot, because in the end, nostalgia isn't about wanting to go back. It's about honoring what never left. The warmth, the laughter, the sound of the world before it sped up. The feeling that life didn't need to be captured to be meaningful. It just had to be lived. And in that way, the 2000s never really ended. They just became the heartbeat beneath everything that came after.